The corridors of the Red Keep kept their heat after sunset, holding it as stone holds a secret. Lord Eddard Stark felt the day's warmth soaking his boots and pressing up through his bones as he walked beneath torches that spat and whispered on iron brackets. He could taste the smoke and the tang of oiled mail, and underneath it all, a sweeter scent that didn't belong here. Crushed flowers, snow-damp leather, the way Winterfell smelled when the northern wind came straight down the Godswood pool. Memory carried its own perfumes. He shook them off like a man shaking rain from his cloak and kept walking. Ser Barristan Selmy had met him at the foot of the tower steps, white cloak trailing in a loop across the flagstones. His hand flat on the pommel of his sword in the old habit of a man ready to answer for his oath even to the echo of his own footsteps. The old knight's face had always seemed hewn rather than grown, a countenance shaped to carry honor easily, but tonight a shadow had collapsed the lines around his mouth. "He asks for you," Ser Barristan said. "He says he will not sleep till he sees you." There were other words below the words, as there always were when men with duty met on warm stone at night. They carried the sound of hooves and of a boar's bellowing grunt. They carried a country road and a wineskin loosened from a squire's careless fingers. They carried the laughter Robert had left the city with, and another laughter that returned, low and hopeless and thick with the taste of blood. "I am here," Ned said. He did not ask if the king would live. The old knight's eyes had answered that question already. And besides, there are verdicts a man only hears once in his life, and once is enough. Up the stairs, past a tapestry of the field of fire where dragons swam in woven flame, past the arch with the chipped cornice that had gaped like a missing tooth since before any of them were born, past the pair of gold cloaks who straightened and looked about as uncertain as boys in a September Eddard's own leg, still not right since the street sent up its own small pain with each rise. He kept his weight on the rail, hands slipping along stones smoother than silk, polished by generations of hands, kings and guardsmen and frightened messengers. The ache in his thigh was an honest pain, not the sort that warped a soul. There are worse pains, he thought, and worse truths. At the landing, Grand Maester Pycelle shuffled like an old bear rubbing its back against a tree. His hands were full of the tools of his trade. A little pewter cup and a leather bladder with a brass mouth and a few sprigs of something sharp-smelling crushed between his fingers. His beard looked like mildewed parchment in bad light. His grace sleeps and wakes and sleeps again. The old man peered, vision moving laboriously up to find Ned's face. Milk of the poppy, yes, yes, most necessary for pain, though some men cannot abide the dreams. He cried out for you, my lord. He swore you would come, and so, yes, so, you must. Ned did not much like the reap of the poppy. Too easy to empty a man's head into it, to pour his last hour down a black throat. He will have what he needs, Ned said. Stand aside. Pycelle stood aside, bowing stiffly until his back made a sound like drying reeds. Varys stood beyond him, a roundness of shadow beneath a candle idling on a fat puddle of wax. The eunuch could make himself into a piece of furniture when he wished, a plump and silent coffer in which a greater lord had misplaced something he would never see again. My lord hand, Varys murmured, folding his hands as if to keep them from touching anything more than air. The gods have cruel timing. My prayers, such as they are yours. Keep them, Ned thought, because your prayers are the kind that line cages with velvet. Aloud he said, I will not be disturbed. I am a man who knows when to leave a lord alone with an old friend, Varys said gently, and his eyes said that he never truly left anyone alone, not even with the dead. 2 Kingsguard flanked the door. Ser Marantran's face was a slack curtain above his jaw. Ser Boros Blunt breathed through his mouth as if the air had gone thick. They stood aside without asking a question. Ned's hand, resting on the door latch, felt the old chill of polished metal that had not known the day's heat. He pushed. The chamber air was humid with candlelight and blood. The hearth was low, coals collapsed in red hills, their topmost ash veined white. Somebody had thought to bring flowers. Their stems stood in a high-necked jug on the mantel, limp as if already surrendering to the city's breath. The bed was a burden of cloth. On its mound, King Robert lay with his beard clotted into ropes. his chest rising with the sulky reluctance of a spoiled child commanded to do a thing it did not want to do. He had always been a big man, grandly and thoughtlessly so, but the hunt had hollowed him. Over him hovered the memory of the boy who had laughed in the snow with a hammer he could hardly lift. Underneath him lay the ruin the boar had made, the wound that smelled of hot iron and old pennies. Lancel sat at the far edge like a boy who had been made to pull up a stool in a room where men wept. His eyes were drowned. "Out," Robert said without opening his eyes. The word came like a stone turned in a plow. Lancel jerked to his feet, knocked his knee on a coffer, tried to bow, bumped his chin on the bedpost and went. "You too," the king said to somebody else who had moved closer. It might have been a hand. It might have been nothing at all. The room changed slowly. A bench scraped. The coals exhaled. Silence, except for breath and the occasional startled pop as some little pocket of resin in the wood gave up and burst. "Ned!" "I am here." The king screwed one eye open as if picking a lock on the world. "I'm ugly, you know that. Always were," Ned said, and the word ran out of him on a smile he had not permitted. He moved to the side of the bed and stood where Robert could see him without much turning. Pain like that lived in the ribs, a thief that kept the lungs. Robert smelled of sweat, of iron, of the cheap apple wine they had tried to pour his pain into, and under those of the boy from Storm's End who had slept in armor and eaten with his hands. He felt the memory of Lyanna move through him like breath drawn on a winter morning. Robert squinted as if he were trying to bring the past into focus. "We were dogs," he muttered, "barking, biting. You were a wolf and careful even then. I was a boar. Gods, I ran. I ran at everything. And now the boar has run at me." He broke off into a low chuckle that tangled quickly in pain. His hand moved, blindly, searching for something, found Ned's forearm and patted it twice as if checking that it was still solid. "What of my letter?" Ned slid a folded parchment from his doublet, the ink still new enough to shine around the edges where the candle caught it. He had written it carefully, with a hand that did not shake, words squared and plain. "Lord Eddard Stark to serve as Lord Protector of the realm and hand of the king until such time as my heir takes the throne." He had not written the lie Robert had wanted from him, about the king's son. Instead, he had written the word heir as if it were capable of knowing itself. "We will sign it together," Ned said. "Your seal will make it plain." "My seal." Robert turned his head, the muscles at the side of his neck jumping. "They said I'd bled too much already. Pycelle poured the poppy down my throat like I was some broken mare. Gods, I hate it. Brings dreams like a whore brings the pox. My seal. Give me a pen and I'll prick my thumb and smear it like a bawling babe. Come. Help me up." He reached for life as a man who knows he's falling reaches for the ledge he knows won't hold him. Ned put his hands under the broad shoulder, careful. The heat of the fever burned through the linen. They raised Robert a little, enough to put the coverlet behind him like a bolster. The king's breath hitched. He looked past Ned with sudden focus sharpened by pain. "All out," he said again, and the order had edge enough to shave with. "Leave me alone with my brother." Ned did not correct him. Sometimes the truth is a gate you close behind a beast. The chamber yielded at last. The last presence was Ser Barristan, silent as a tree in winter, and the king lifted his hand to him, a gesture that said both go and I know you will not be far. When the door thumped against its jamb and the iron latch settled, the room grew vast. The bed was a hill in the middle of it, a hill with a man on it who had once been strong enough to tilt the earth like a child's toy. Robert blinked, and the jape left him like wine leaving a cup knocked over. "You were always a poor liar," he said softly, "harsh and honest. It made men love you because they could trust you to tell them how ugly they were. I need that now. I need the ugliest thing." Ned stood very still. He could hear the city beyond the window, distant voices, the drag of a cartwheel, a woman laughing in a way that sounded like the first part of a sob. The Tower of Joy stood in him too, its stones as white as bone, its banners folded forever. His sister's hands were cool on his cheeks. "Promise me, Ned." He had promised. The promise was the one clean line in a tangle of smoke. I have borne a lie in my house, Ned said, and his own voice sounded like a stranger. It obeyed him, and yet it felt like it did not belong to him. A lie for honor, a lie for love. I told it so that Wolf's blood would not wash a boy's life out into the sea. You loved her, Robert. I loved Lyanna so much I made a war out of not having her, Robert said, not in anger. It was a statement as bald as a spear. I have loved so poorly that the gods laughed and gave me a crown to prove it. Ned thought of Lyanna in her bed of blood and roses, moaning for water. He had brought her. He had knelt and lifted her head. He had told her he would keep the boy safe. He had sworn it in the old god's silence and the new god's bright windows, and in the heart he had not really ever given to any woman but Cat. He pulled breath and steadied it. She bore a child, Robert, he said. Rhaegar's child. Silence can have a shape. This one swelled between them like a sail bellied with wind. It seemed to push the walls out and make the coals dull. Robert's hand, still on Ned's forearm, did not move. Neither did his face. For a heartbeat, perhaps for two, Ned thought he had placed it too late, too far into the poppy and the pain, that the words were pebbles hurled into a well that had already swallowed too many. Then a line lifted and broke, a wave coming across the king's features and striking them strange. Robert's mouth went slack and closed again. When he found his breath, the first sound he made was not a curse. It was a groan of a man hauled back to a day he had taken to be over and done with. Say it again, he said. Lyanna had a son, Ned said, and his voice would not let him say the name he had given the boy, the name he had made up out of need and snow, because there was another name standing inside it, a name that had belonged to a prince and to songs. I took him from the place where she died. I took him and carried him home and called him mine. I did it to keep him safe from the sword you have never learned not to swing. Robert's grip tightened. My sword killed Rhaegar. My sword broke his breastbone and spilled him into the river. Your sword killed the prince, Ned said. Do not make me teach you the difference between a man who sang in male and a babe who had yet to draw his first breath. I have never thought you cruel to children, for all your hunting and your talk. I thought you reckless and too full of yourself, but I never thought that of you. Hear me, Robert. Hear me and hear her. She begged me. She begged me with her last strength. Promise me, Ned, she said, and I swore. The boy is alive. He has lived under my roof, and there is good in him. He is a Stark where he must be and something else where he cannot help it. He has your Lyanna's look when he is quiet. Do not ask me to kill him. I never asked you to, Robert began, and then he closed his eyes. Gods, he said into the darkness behind his lids. Gods, 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 what have we done? Rhaegar's get. He said the words the way a man says the name of a sickness. But his hand did not leave Ned. It squeezed again, then let go and went to the bedclothes, a bare paw clawing at linen that would not answer him. When he opened his eyes, the blue of them looked raw, as if something had been scoured. I wanted her, he said softer. I wanted her, and I did not get her. That is the bare taste of it, isn't it, old friend? I did not love as she needed. I never even knew how. Gods help me. The child. He swallowed and coughed, and the cough had wetness in it. He spat a little red onto a corner of linen and stared at it in mild disbelief. We killed children, not just you or me, all of us. We killed them with banners. I put a lord's voice to it and sent the raven. Daenerys. She is far, Ned said. Far enough that our words become weak by the time they find her. I told them to kill her on the other side of a world, Robert said dully, as if telling himself something he had watched another man do. I sat in a chair and said, kill the girl and the child she bears. I said it because once a prince ran with her father's name in his blood. That's what a king does, Ned. He points and other people do the thing and then he drinks. Lyanna would have hated me for that. She would have wept, Ned said. And then she would have dried her eyes and done what she must. That was who she was. Robert's laugh was a choked little thing, but it lived. You always thought better of her than I did. You thought better of all of us. He blew out a breath and the effort put a shine on his face. "The boy." Ned said nothing. He had the face in his head without trying. John in the yard with ghost white as milk beside him. John's eyes listening more than his ears. The way he went still in rain as if the drops were teaching him something important. They would say the boy had the look of Stark because people say what makes them comfortable. But there were moments when a light moved in the boy's gaze that did not belong north of the neck. A watchfulness that was not quite the old god's silence but akin to it. "What name?" Robert said suddenly, like a man turning over a coin and testing its weight. "You would have called him something from the north, I suppose. The best of you put names like stones in a wall." "John," Ned said, because not saying it would be another lie layered on the first. "Jon Snow." Robert's mouth twitched. "A bastard's name. You hid him even from yourself." "I gave him the only shelter I knew that did not draw a sword," Ned said. "There were few such shelters that year." "John." The king said it again, tasting it. He tilted his head and watched Ned through lashes heavy with sweat. The world had been good to this man once. It had made him strong, and then it had made him soft and taken him down as if for sport. "Tell me what I am supposed to do about this, Ned. I am about to die. No man has ever been less ready for dying than I am. I have a wife in this castle who is not my wife, and a son who is not my son, and I have spent all my grain playing at a harvest. The one thing I ever wanted was a girl who died because I hooped my banners and wore my father's ring. Tell me. For once, you tell me what to do and I'll do it." "You cannot undo the years," Ned said. "But you can do one thing cleanly, and it might carry you farther into whatever of the gods' halls are open to men like us. Give the realm to the man it belongs to. Not Joffrey, Stannis." The king's face made an effort to return to the old Robert scowl, then abandoned it halfway. "Stannis," he muttered. "Stannis. He will make the realm a table and order the knives. He will count the loaves. He will brood like a barred window in a storm. He will do the duty and make everyone else feel it more than he does. He is what a king should be by all the rules. I never liked rules." "You respected them enough to win," Ned said. "Renly is a boy, charming but a boy. Stannis will make war against you from the same side of a room if you give him cause. But he will not spend coin on a whore while the granaries rot. He will hold the line. He will hold the realm long enough for winter to come and go. That is what is needed." "Needed," Robert said, as if it were a jest. He looked past Ned at the ceiling where a tiny crack wandered from one corner like a traveler without maps. "Stannis is my brother." He spoke the word brother as if tasting a small stone. "He will take this as a duty. I always toss duty at him like a bone. He chews slowly, and after, there are no scraps for the dogs." "Let there be no scraps," Ned said. "There has been enough feasting on us all." Robert closed his eyes, opened them, shut them again. When he spoke, the rasp was gentler. "And the boy," he said, as if there were only one boy in the world. "Lioness." Ned let the coals deepen a little as he considered. Words had weight. He stacked them carefully. "Keep him secret," he said at last. "Keep him safe. Do not leave your wrath as an inheritance for the next madman to spend. He is a boy. He does not know anything of crowns. He thinks of snow and of the way the yard smells after rain. Let him have that much. He will grow into a man with a true heart. I believe it. If you trust me still after this, trust me that much." "I trust you," Robert said hoarsely, and the admission seemed to cost him dearer than it had when he was young. "You have been the only thing in this city that is not a mirror. Gods, I am tired. Tired of being a song people keep humming because they cannot bear the silence." "The boy." He put a hand to his side. His fingers came away wet. He looked at them dumbly and then started to laugh again and then choked. "I will not name him. That is mercy. If I put his name into the room, it will fill with knives. I will not, but I will tell you what I will do." He labored for breath and found it. "There is a box in the coffer there with the boar carved on it. The one I had made when I was young and thought I would keep tokens. There should be a paper and a ring in it. The ring is my father's. I meant to give it to my son when he became a man. I have no son. Stannis? Yes, Stannis shall have the paper. You will be my Lord Protector. You will give the ring to my heir when he is crowned. But there will be a second paper. I will tell them to write what I say, and I will sign it with the hand I have left. It will not name the boy. It will say there is a child of Lyanna Stark living, and that I command that child's life be held safe by my friend, Eddard Stark, and by the good men who still care for what is not theirs. If anyone reads it, they will argue over the pronouns and the ink. While they argue, the boy will live. Varys will read it if the wind does not steal it. He reads everything, and he will play at protecting what must be kept until there is better use for it. He will sell it for cloves and coin, Ned said, harsher than he intended. He will, Robert agreed, but he has a taste for secrets that do not hurt him to keep. He loves to put them on shelves and admire the dust they gather. Give him this one. He owes me 3 lives. He has for years, and I have never called them in. Let this be one. I will write the paper you ask, Ned said. No, Robert said, and there was the old stubbornness, a last flare like fat catching at the bottom of a pan. You will speak. It and Pycelle and Selmy will bring the ink, and I will show them I have my wits for this and maybe for this alone. He closed his eyes and summoned a smile from some store of himself not yet plundered. I cannot speak it pretty. You will make it ugly and so good. They brought the parchment, the quill, the ink. Pycelle held the light and nodded the way old men nod when they want to appear to be something other than a wind-blown sack of bones. Robert's hand shook and then steadied as if he had called a remembered self back to sit in it. He signed where he was meant to sign, and when the signet came, he pressed the boar's head deep enough to make the wax scream in its own mute way. They watched the king sink, watched his breath go slow and then ragged and then slow again. Ser Barristan put the papers into a leather case and tucked it to his breast with the quiet gravity of a man who had put too many things into the ground and still made every one of them a ceremony. When the others had gone and the latch had fallen into place once more, Robert turned his head. Pain had wiped him clean. Will you keep your promise? He asked, and in the firelight his eyes were not blue and not anything but the color of a man waiting at the edge of a wood, listening for a sound he could not name. I gave it once, Ned said. I will give it again. Good, Robert said. Good. He took breath as if hauling it up out of a well. You remember that feast at Winterfell? Your father had that old goose of a bannerman tell a story about the king who had the mountain moved pebble by pebble. He said a spoon would do in time if you had patience. I wanted to pick up a shovel and throw the mountain into the sea. It seems I have been shoveling at myself all these years. Pebbles. Pebbles.
Oh, Ned.
If I had married her, you would have buried her, Ned said, and thought he might later ask himself why he had made that cruelty. Felt like biting his own tongue to keep from saying something worse. Robert's mouth twitched again. Perhaps I would have found a way. I could spoil anything. He let out his breath. It is not so bad, is it, dying? Everyone else is doing it. I can too. Ned stood there until the candles slipped into their own thoughts and the hearth's red fell into black. He stood while Robert slept with his mouth open like a boy too tired from play to close it. He stood when Robert woke and asked for water and swore at the taste of it, and then reached blindly for Ned's forearm again, as if the limb were a rope leading back to shore. He stood until morning through a seam of pale cloth above the city, until the cries in the streets changed from nights' bargains to days. He stood and thought of a boy with his hand in a wolf's fur, and then of that same boy with his hand on a hilt, and old fear and old pride braided together until they became a thing he could wear. When he went out at last, the corridor smelled of last night's oil and this morning's sweat. Varys had arranged himself like a cushion on the bench. Only his eyes moved, bright fish under calm water. You have the look of a man who has had words spoken to him that will never be unspoken, the eunuch murmured. I have the look of a man who has seen a friend die, Ned said. Not yet, Varys said, so soft it might not have belonged to him. We are all always not yet. He placed his hands together as if framing an invisible thing. These are dangerous dawns, my lord hand. In the gray, men mistake each other. One might be wise to see by more than one candle. Where were your candles? Ned said. When the wine sack was poured for him and you knew what would come of a drunk king on a hunt with a boy who wanted to be a man, the eunuch sighed. It made his cheeks flutter a little. Where are my candles when a river floods its banks? I do what I can with the driftwood after. Do we quarrel, Lord Stark? You will not find me a match. I prefer to run from arguments and then arrive on the far side of them with a helpful cloak. Keep your cloaks, Ned said. He started down the steps and did not wait for the soft souls to follow, though they did, of course. They always did. In his solar, the city lay before him, pale as a woman newly risen. The roofs looked dull, the smoke lazy. A barge slid on the river like a man without urgency. He felt the north in him rise like sap. Stay still, it said. Watch, breathe while the trees breathe. But there was no snow here to cover tracks. Every footstep left its mud. He called for Tomard and Kane and Desmond. The men who were left to him like staves survived from a ship broken on rocks. They stood in a stiff line. They had his words already written into the angle of their shoulders. Men learn a lord by watching his silences even more than his orders. We send ravens, Ned said. One to Dragonstone for Lord Stannis. One to Winterfell for Maester Luwin. One to White Harbor for Lord Manderley. The words to Stannis are these. He dictated slowly, turning the thought in a careful forge. He wrote of Robert's letter naming him Lord Protector and of the truth that Stannis was the king's heir. He did not write about Jon. On that subject his quill might be a sword. Stannis would see the point of that sword too clearly. He feared the kind of man who obeyed a syllable and ignored a human face. When the men had gone and their boot heels had fallen down the corridor like stones into a well, he sat for a time and let his finger trace the grain in the table. He had never liked this table. It was made of a wood that had eaten too much sun, and it shone as if it had been polished by sighs. He preferred the old trestle in his Winterfell solar with its notch where Benjen had carved a childish wolf and had been thrashed by old Nan for it. He put his head in his hands then and let it be heavy. Sansa came at mid-morning, led by a maid in the soft shoes that the southern girls wore. The maid kept her eyes the way maids kept them in castles, slightly down but everywhere. Sansa had dressed as if for court, though there was no court. Her hair lay in cunning ropes. A necklace winked against the down of her throat. She had cat's bones stretched out smooth and new and Lyanna's stubborn tilt of the chin when you told her no. The sight made his chest ache at once with pride and the fear that comes of having anything so breakable entrusted to you by a god who likes wagers. Father, she said, and she had learned to make the word do more than one thing at once. Here it was a supplication and a weapon and a bridge altogether. The queen says, she says his grace will surely mend. She says the gods love to surprise men who lose heart. She says Joffrey will want me close to him, to comfort him, because I am his betrothed and my place is at his side. Father, may I go to him? May I see him? If he is frightened, I should hold his hand. I am not a child. It would have been a mercy, he thought, if she were. It would be a mercy if any of us were. Arya is at her lesson, he said instead of answering, because the mind has its ways of walking in circles when the straight road is a cliff. With Syrio, are you jealous of her stick? Sansa's mouth tightened. She will never be a lady. She should be sent back to Winterfell to run with the boys and wear her breeches and shout. It is unseemly. It is necessary, perhaps, Ned said. Each of us is unseemly to someone. You mean I am unseemly to you? She shot back with the quick wound-child cruelty that second children learn while honing themselves on first children. He remembered being Brandon's brother and being told he was thoughtful when no one meant to be kind. You think I am foolish. I think you are the age you are, Ned said. I think you are trying to look around corners that you cannot yet see past. That is not folly. That is being alive. He stood, slow where his leg forced him to be slow. Listen to me, Sansa. A thing can be both as bright and as sharp as a knife. The court shines, but it cuts. It makes wounds that do not look like wounds and leaves men wishing for honest scars. When the queen tells you you belong at Joffrey's side, she tells you something that flatters both of you. Flattery is a net. Once you have both feet in it, the fishermen have you for as long as they like. He touched her chin lightly with the back of his knuckles, the way he had when she was small enough to sit on his forearm and watch the world as if it had been laid out to amuse her. I will not let you be caught if I can help it. You cannot keep me caged, she said, hot with the conviction of a girl who has lived all her life inside walls and still believes there are forests just beyond them that people keep from her out of spite. I love him, father. I truly do. When he looks at me, I feel like all the space between us is filled with soft light. He will be a great king, and I will be a good queen for him. I will be gentle and wise. I will make you proud. She stood in front of him like a tower the masons were still working on. You could already see the beauty in it, the way the light would touch it at sunset. You could also see the scaffolds and the men moving at dizzying heights. You make me proud now, Ned said, because it cost nothing to let the truth be a bomb. But I have to ask for your obedience. I will ask it now, and if the gods are kind, I will never need to ask it again. Keep to your rooms. Let your maid say you are indisposed. If anyone comes to you whose face seems made of smiles, send them away. If anyone comes to you whose face is made of iron, run to me. She held very still. He watched the thought move through her like a shadow cast by wind. At last she nodded very little, as if marking something in her own ledger. For a day, she said. Only a day. After that, Joff will need me. For a day, he agreed. When she had gone, the room felt like an emptied bowl. Arya came as a scuffed heel scrape and a bright question before she even appeared. We did the cat today, father. The one that lives in the yard below the gatehouse with the ear that looks like somebody took a bite. And then she halted with the suddenness of a colt checked too sharply. She saw his face with the sort of eyes that did not simply look at things but went to live briefly inside them. What is it? She asked. Then, without waiting, is it the king? It is the king, Ned said. He took a tusk and it found his liver. Arya's mouth made a little "oh." Then she said cautiously, Jory always said never go for the big one first. He said pick off the boar pigs and the old thin sows and let the big tusker come to you. Then from the side. Jory knew much about many things. The name had the weight of earth over it now. It still surprised him how often he forgot that weight. He had tried to talk to Jory that morning in his head, and the silence that answered had made him feel foolish and old. Arya, I may send you north. You and your sister. Today. She was eager, then checked herself, then angry at having showed eagerness. I mean, if you think it best. But the lessons. Winterfell will have wolves to spare to teach you to dance with sticks, he said. Syrio has given you something you will not lose by changing rooms. You will keep it and you will polish it alone in your head, and it will please you when you are oath-keeping your watch over your own fire. He stepped closer and set a hand to her shoulder. She smelled faintly of the straw the Bravosi had strewn over the flagstones to keep her footfall true. You will keep your eyes open. Promise me. Keep them open and remember what you see. I promise, she said, solemn as any night. The bells began in the hour before noon, not loud at first, as if the city were practicing. Then with more certainty, as if a priest had found the rope's heart and set himself to it. They boomed the way a sky will boom before a storm, telling the low houses in the fish market their roofs will likely leak and telling the men at the top of Aegon's high hill that wine might taste of copper this day. Ned rose, and for a moment he and the sound stood together in the room, measuring each other. He went to the king. The room had been tidied, which is to say it had been arranged to pretend that death had not yet entered, as if dead men did not know when their house was being prepared around them. The candles had been changed. Fresh water waited in a hammered basin. Robert lay on his side as if he were a man taking a quick sleep after a bawdy story. In the air lingered an herbal sharpness that fought with the iron the way small birds fight a hawk. Ser Barristan stood like a statue carved by an artist who understood that stone had blood in it after all. Varys kept the shadow near the wall company with his shadow. Pycelle had a hand on his own chest as if feeling how he was doing. Someone had drawn the hangings so the light fell like mercy. Robert's eyes were open. "It hurts," he said, surprised. "It still hurts." "It means you are not yet in the stranger's hands," Pycelle murmured, and then seemed to decide he had risked optimism and fell silent lest the gods hear him and take offense. "Did you bring me my son?" Robert asked abruptly, looking at Ned as if daring him to say a wrong thing. "I brought you your friend," Ned said, "and your letter, and the men who will witness it." Robert grunted. "Good, good." He seemed to gather himself. "Hear me," he said to the room. "Hear and mark. By my hand and by the boar that killed me, I name Eddard Stark of Winterfell my Lord Protector to rule in my stead until my heir takes the throne. And I command that the child of Lyanna Stark, living, be protected under the care of Eddard Stark and such loyal men as he shall appoint, until the times turn and the lands are safe from the knives of traitors and madmen. Write it now with the ugliness it deserves." Pycelle's quill scratched. Ser Barristan's eyes did not move, but everything in him had started to lean like a tree in wind. Varys's mouth made a small appreciative shape, as a man makes when shown a jewel of an odd cut. They sealed it with wax. Robert's finger pressed the seal as if pressing against water. When it was done, he found Ned's hand without looking and held it clumsily. "I am tired," he said again, the words not a complaint this time but a simple telling. "Let me sleep." The bells did the rest. If you have never heard a city know it has lost a king, you cannot be told. The sound begins under things, in oven brick, in barrels of rotten fish, in the old mold on cellar walls. And then it rises and inhabits mouths and makes them strange. People who would never say a king's name aloud for fear of odd luck begin to say it because saying is the only way to keep from hearing. The noise climbs stairwells. It rides a gull. It lays down in the river like a drowned man for a heartbeat and then floats to the surface again, face to the blank sky. In the small tilt of time between one bell and the next, Ned Stark went to the window and looked at a city that had begun, in that exact moment, to be someone else's. The river kept moving. Sun boiled on slate. Somewhere a woman argued that her copper coin weighed the same as it had yesterday. The world did not break. It never did. It bent instead, and men took oaths and thought they would hold. Cersei Lannister sent for him. The summons arrived like a dinner invitation, creamy paper and green ribbon, the hand that wrote the words precise as a needle. The Queen requests the presence of the hand of the king in the council chamber at his earliest convenience. The word earliest was a knife. The way she had underlined it was a caress. He did not answer with paper. He gathered his cloak and his men and he went. The hallways had grown more crowded with silence. Even the gold cloaks had put their clatter away. He felt watchers in the sense as much as in the eyes. He smelled the kitchen's midday meat all the way up on the high level where courtiers ate sugared words. He smelled, or thought he did, the faint residue of boar. The council chamber wore its authority like old leather. The chairs remembered backs. The maps on the table remembered fingers tracing peril. Peter Baelish lounged as if the ongoingness of things amused him personally. The line of his mouth offered no particular emotion to the scene, his gaze a guessing game. Varys smiled moderately, as if he had taken only a little of something very pleasant for breakfast. Renly was there as well, green doublet cut to flatter, hair as handsomely careless as ever, but his eyes bruised with a night that had not yielded sleep. Grand Maester Pycelle took 2 breaths for everyone else did and made each one a performance. Cersei sat in the king's chair. Ned did not look at the chair first. He looked at Ser Barristan. The old knight stood just behind the queen's shoulder, not at her back but not there either, his face stone and a little more than stone. The white cloak was who he was. He did not know what it meant yet to keep it so. "My lords," Ned said, and let his voice find the cool shade at the base of stone. "The king is dead." Cersei's mouth made the shape of grief and found somehow in the shape a certain calculation. Perhaps her features simply always contained arithmetic. "We have heard," she said, and bowed her head just so. It was decent enough that one had to mark that it was decent. Then she raised her head and said, "We must do the next thing. The realm expects order. If there is a time to tidy, it is now. First, Ned said, and laid his hand upon the table with a sound small and flat as a sword laid next to bread. We read the letter His Grace signed and sealed. There was a moment in which the shape of the room itself seemed to resist. Then Peter's mouth tilted. But of course, he said. How lolly, how proper. He lifted 2 fingers at a page who had warmed himself in a corner by pretending to tend the fire, and the boy skipped out and returned with the letter case. Ser Barristan took it from the boy. His hands did not shake. He drew out the parchment and broke the wax and cleared his throat, not because it needed clearing but because men will do something like that before turning a page that they know is a cliff. He read in a voice like the slab of a sepulchre sliding. He read the words calling Eddard Lord Protector. He read the words naming heir. He did not say a name after that last. He had no name to say. He read what had been written. When he had done, he held the parchment gently, like paper might bruise if roughly handled. The room exhaled. Thank you, Ser Barristan, Cersei said, and she spoke the knight's name the way a woman speaks of a shawl, soft and necessary. Then she smiled, small and certain. Tear it up. Renly's head jerked. Peter's brows lifted a delicate thumb width in polite surprise. Varys's eyes took on a faraway look as if something in him had retreated to a safer room. Pycelle made a little sound like a man biting a very tiny bone. Tear it up? Cersei repeated, and her voice had no anger in it because she had not yet been denied. The words fell into the room and made themselves comfortable. Ser Barristan did not move. Ned watched the muscles in the old knight's jaw take counsel among themselves. At last, smoothly, because old men who have carried 1,000 weights learn where to put their backs, Ser Barristan said, It bears the king's seal. And the king is dead, Cersei said with a gentle patience that was a threat. Robert Baratheon is dead, and a king's seal dies with a king. Tears do not soften wax. This is a pretty scrap written by a dying man who could not name what everyone in this city knows, that his firstborn son is Joffrey, and Joffrey is to be king. I do not disdain your parchment, my lords. I simply do not permit it to rule me. Renly, who had perhaps come ready to rehearse the look of righteous sorrow, found surprise in himself instead. We may at least pretend to follow our own customs, he said. There will be a coronation in due time, but until then the regency is mine, Cersei said. She folded her hands and looked at Ned with the languor of a cat on a windowsill. If his grace named a Lord Protector, he named me, his queen, his wife. The pause was almost imperceptible. If the pause had been any longer, someone might have been able to throw a knife into it. The boy is 14. He needs his mother's counsel more than that of a northern lord who cannot say the words that are in front of him. I will say them, Ned said, and the fear in him felt like a child sleeping somewhere in a house. Present, but in another room. Joffrey is not the king's son. It is a strange thing to watch words land on faces. You can see whose minds are strong by whom the words strike without knocking them down. Peter did not blink. He simply put another coin on the tower he was building in his head. Varys fluttered his fingers and made them still. Renly's mouth opened and shut as if catching a fly and then letting it go. Pycelle actually swayed. Cersei smiled. Her smile at that moment was not the sort that involves the mouth. It involved the eyes, but not as one might think. It involved that place behind the eyes where people count. Do you seek your head? She asked, almost fondly. No, Ned said. I seek our souls. Keep yours if you like, she said. You cannot give me one. He put his hand to the leather case that held the second paper, the one that did not name Jon and yet had him folded into its fibers. It seemed to him a small thing, light as a sparrow, and yet it carried a weight it could not possibly bear. He left it where it was. There was time yet, and there was no time at all. By the law, he said, and was aware he was making himself into a kind of stone for the people in the room to push against. And perhaps he had always been that and could not be anything else. Stannis Baratheon is heir. Cersei's eyes lowered. You mean by the law that loves you and has never loved me, she said. You mean by the rules made by men who looked like your father and thought like your gods. I always preferred men with hammers to men with scrolls, Lord Stark, and yet here I am with scrolls. How they turn." Peter Baelish rose half out of his chair and made a small calming motion with his fingers. "My lady, my lord, words like law and heir and regent and queen have a way of spoiling appetites. Might we adjourn and let everyone eat before we resume feeding one another?" "We will adjourn," Ned said, and let the iron in his chest speak. "To fetch the city watch and to see that the boy Joffrey does not seat himself in a chair he cannot keep by right. We will adjourn to send for Lord Stannis. We will adjourn to keep the peace while the law walks the road it must." Cersei leaned back in the king's chair as if testing how it accepted her weight. "Fetch your watch," she said. "People who fetch men with truncheons often feel very brave until the men with truncheons flock to a prettier lady. We shall see whose whistles they answer." They did. Ned walked out with his men and with the weight of the second paper against his breast. Peter fell into step with him as naturally as ivy finds old stone. "You are the wrong man in the right story, my lord," the master of coin murmured, so near that only Ned could hear. "In my experience, the right story takes care of that problem in one of two ways. Shall we try to persuade it to choose the gentler?" "You will have the city watch?" Ned asked. "I will have what I always have," Peter said, which was to say nothing and everything. Friends who like to see friends prosper. Purses that open for the right words. Men who prefer to be paid now rather than when a court remembers to reward them. You may place your hand upon their shoulders and say they are yours. They will nod. They will be mine. They will be whoever the hour pays them to be. That is the truth of this city. Do you know what I like about you, Lord Stark? You cannot believe that. It is like the way some men cannot believe there are monsters in the sea. They hear the stories. They drink their soup. And then one day a great grayback rolls out of the water just beside their little boat and they say, "That is lovely." Peter smiled. "For what it's worth, I rather hope your fish eats other fishermen first." "Do what you said you would," Ned said. Peter bowed. "I will do what I can." "Do what you said you would," Ned repeated. Peter's eyes warmed, which was a trick all his own. "Very well." The day deepened as if the sun had been given more hours to spend. The courtyards became albums of glances and hurried conversations. In the yard where Arya had been taught to move her feet as if they were thinking creatures, a pair of drays had been drawn up to carry casks of salt fish. A boy in a brown cap watched Ned pass and did not look away. He had the look of a bird that has noticed a hawk. Ned stopped and beckoned to Tomard. "At sunset," he said quietly, "my daughters go to the sept with their septa for evening prayers. That is what any man watching will think. In truth, they will go to the river. A barge will wait. They will go to the Tower of the Hand. From there, they will go to the ship that sails with the tide. The ship will bear the Manderley banner. See that it does." Tomard nodded and did not waste words. He had a black-lacquered look in his eye, the look of a man who has set himself to a task and would be irritated by gods as much as men for interrupting it. "Aye, my lord." Ned found himself drawn to the godswood, poor and thin and Southron though it was, a cluster of trees that had the humility of travelers trying to mimic a homeland and failing with dignity. The weirwood had no face. Its leaves hung still. He liked it that way. It did not try to look at him. He sat on a stone at the edge of the little pool and put his hands on his knees and told himself he was resting the leg. In truth, he spoke to a silence. "I have spent so long trying to do the thing that would please both the living and the dead," he told it. "Tell me now if I have gone wrong again." The wind shifted, and the smell of the city came and went like a rumor. He closed his eyes and saw the Tower of Joy as clear as if it had been lifted from Dorne and brought here. He saw the 3 white cloaks who had stood against him and Howland in the dawn. He had dreamed often of that fight, but in the dream he always did less than he had. In the dream he always died perfectly and let the world go on without him. It felt immaculately simple. The real fight had been a series of ugly scramblings and gasps and half-blind parries. A desperate stinking of men who did not want to die yet. In his memory now, he watched himself make one of those clumsy salvations and saw the nearest Kingsguard's mouth make a small, pleased shape, as if even then the man had admired the way men did not give up their living without a certain style. He got to his feet later than he should have. The day had become one of those lingering things that makes you feel as if light has been laid over the world and pressed with slow, warm hands. He walked back into stone. Men met him with the faces of men who had found a rope in the water. They told him that the gold cloaks would be his when he asked for them. Peter had arranged it. They told him that the boy Joffrey was being readied to receive his lords in the throne room. They told him that Cersei had called for her father. They told him that Renly had been seen in whispered conference with Ser Loras, and that then the younger Baratheon had vanished from the east stables. Horses with him, banners rolled tight under saddles. They told him things he had expected and did not profit from hearing, and some he had not expected and could not shape into use. The city was a board that men were putting pieces on, and he could not always tell the pieces from the crumbs. In his chambers, he found a boy with a bird on his fist and a look of surprise to discover that his task had brought him so high. "Raven from Winterfell, M-Lord," the boy said. "Back to you and quick." Ned broke the seal and read Luwin's neat, kind hand. The maester wrote of weather and of barley and of Bran's stubbornness and of Robb's sudden way with men, which had arrived as if someone had given the boy a sword when he slept and he had woken and taken it up like an old friend. Luwin wrote of Jon too, though he called him simply Jon, and said that the boy was as committed as ever to joining the Night's Watch when the snows came, and that he had a good hand with the pups, and that he had begun to ask the sort of questions maesters respect in boys, questions that begin with why and then do not accept easy answers. At the end, Luwin added a postscript that made Ned put his finger on it to stay the tremor, and read it thrice. "A white raven has come from the citadel. The conclave has declared that summer is ended." He folded the letter and set it beside the second paper, the one with the unnameable child in it, and for a strange moment the two lay together like pages of the same book. When he looked up, the light had changed. It had gone the color of late honey, the color roads where that lead toward night. He limped to the throne room with his men around him. The doors had been thrown open so that the smell of 1,000 bodies could wash in and out like a tide. The steps to the Iron Throne looked steeper than they ever had, or perhaps he had simply become more aware of the climbing all men do to reach a seat, only to discover there is nowhere to set your sword and no place to rest your back. Joffrey stood in a new suit of black and gold that had been cut as if the tailor had loved him. His hair gleamed unbecomingly. His face wore a grief that had been gilded for public display. Cersei stood near him with a look such as a mother wears when she has arranged a tableau perfectly and wants to enjoy the gasp. The lords pressed in, smelling of musk and lemon and fear. The gold cloaks arranged themselves in neat lines, the men who had promised Peter their attention drifting to where Ned needed them, and settling with the self-importance of dogs who have suddenly realized they are part of a hunt. Ned walked forward with the leather case in his hand. He did not open it. He did not need it for what he intended to say. He stopped and lifted his voice, a northern bell in a southern hall. "By the command of the late King Robert Baratheon, sealed and witnessed," he said, and the words went up into the high places where the dragons had once hung. "I, Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Hand of the King, serve as Lord Protector of the Seven Kingdoms until the rightful heir, Stannis Baratheon, is crowned." The words struck Joffrey's face the way a throne clod does. He went red and then white and then made a noise that would have embarrassed a smaller boy. Cersei's hand settled on his shoulder, fingers seeming almost to sink into him. "Guards," she said sweetly, as one summonses a maid for more wine. For an instant, the hall held its breath to see which way the wind would turn the wheat. The gold cloaks looked at Ned and at their captain, and their captain looked at Peter, who smiled a small, private smile for Ned alone and tilted his fingers in a tiny gesture that meant someday this will amuse you. They moved. The gold cloaks surged forward. They surged past Ned to the men behind him. Desmond cried out once, astonishingly high. Tomard threw up an arm and took a blade there that pinned it to the wood of the door behind him. Cain got his sword half out, and half out was the worst place to have a sword in a press of men. Ned turned and saw the eyes of the men he knew become something like fish eyes as they died, and felt the old rage in him like a wolf he had starved too long. He reached for his own blade and something cut his leg again, the leg that had never forgiven the street. He went to a knee and then to another, Someone seized him under the arms and the light went full of motes as if the air had turned to flour. "Easy," Peter's voice said in his ear, friendly as a winter fire. "I told you not to trust me." They took his sword and took his men and took him. It felt like a part of a thing he had always known would happen. When they pulled him upright, he found Circe's eyes. For a heartbeat, for the width of an unsaid word, he saw something in them that was not triumph. Then it was gone. She smiled that small, perfect smile again and lifted her hand. "Take him to the Tower of the Hand," she said. "He will be comfortable there, for now." "Mother," Joffrey said shrilly, a boy turning to a woman who had taught him to fly and who now must tell him which wings to flap. He spoke treason. He should be. "All things in season," Cersei said lightly. "You will find you love seasons, sweetling. They keep you from making all your mistakes at once." They carried Ned out as if he were a chair. Men watched him with the particular look reserved for the powerful when they are being moved like furniture. His head swam and then steadied. He saw Varys watching from the doorway and Varys's eyes on the leather case still under Ned's arm. Varys's gaze was like a man's when he sees a bird fly into a room and wonders where the hole is. The eunuch let his hands flutter and then come to rest, and he made no move to intercept the case or to draw attention to it. His balance between compassion and calculation, as always, was exact. In the corridors, the heat had grown heavy. The cold that the stone had held all morning had finally gone to the last depth of itself and yielded. The castle smelled of men and of old wicks and of the dandled sweat of fear. The men who carried him grunted, and one of them had breath like a dog's belly. He could have hated them. He found he did not particularly. He had never been very good at hating men who did their tasks in front of him. His hatred had always turned toward ideas and the way they put on faces. They set him down in his own chamber, the irony of which would have made Peter smile had Peter been there to see it. The door closed with a heavy courtesy. He heard the bar fall. He sat back in the chair by the window. The river was copper now and already thinking of gray. The city had resumed its conversation. Somewhere not far away, someone had begun to sing a song that people only sing in alleys or when they think they are alone in kitchens. It told of a woman who had loved a man she should not have loved, and of how love had gone to live in the house with them like a stray cat and eaten what it liked. He put the leather case on the table. He drew out the second paper and read the words he had made Robert say. He folded it and unfolded it and thought of the boy in Winterfell with the white wolf, and of the white raven, and of the way seasons do not ask permission to end. He rolled the parchment and bound it again and set it beneath a loose board he knew of in the floor, because men with war in their heads do not notice the small ways in which wood yields. He touched the board twice as if to bless it, and then he sat back and tried, as men will, to rehearse in his head all the things he would have done differently if given the chance to try again. When the darkness came, it came with little drafts from under the door and the corners, slipping about the room like polite thieves. If he slept, he did not feel himself go down into it. If he dreamed, he did not keep what he found there. He woke to the scrape of the bar lifting and the lamplight of Varys's arrival, gentle, ungentle, like velvet over a blade. "My lord," the eunuch said, "I thought we might speak a word, about little things, which might keep large things from drowning us all." Ned said nothing. He looked at the man until the man offered something more than the opening gambit of a game whose rules only the fat man knew. Varys sighed and sank into a chair across from him without being asked, as if the furniture were his and Ned an intruding guest. "You have made a paper that says a small thing," he said. "I know because the shape of the city tells me when a thing has been made even if I have not touched it yet. And the word that small thing makes is child. You have placed a child in the keeping of a promise and told that promise to men who cannot bear to be seen by their shadows without reaching for a knife. You did it because you are good. You did it because you are bad at doing the other thing men do when they recognize that the truth will be used as a weapon against them, which is to say, hiding it in a deeper pocket. I told the only man besides myself whose heart might have been moved by the truth," Ned said. "It moved him." "It did," Varys agreed. He peered at Ned from under the shelf of his brow. It moved him enough to write a foolishly beautiful thing, which is the sort of thing that will be the opposite of beautiful when Cersei finds it. She will make it an accusation you do not intend. She will make it a threat you do not pose. She will make men think you have a prince hidden under your cloak. Do not give her that struggle. Give the paper to me. Ned almost smiled then, surprised him. So that you may keep it safe. So that I may place it where nothing can find it, Varys said simply. Not even me. I have a place. It is not under a floorboard. I am not a monster in a story, Lord Stark. I am only a man who has had too much practice staying alive. If you let me, I will spend your secret as cleverly as I can. If you do not, the Queen will buy it with a whisper and use it to buy your head. But perhaps I have said too much. It is, after all, your paper and your child. The word your did not escape Ned. He is not mine, he said. He is hers. Varys' smile became faint, and a little his own by now, one hopes. Ned put his hand upon the board, not lifting it. He felt the old wood's grain with his palm. He tried to think of a reason to refuse the eunuch that did not rest entirely on the fact of his dislike and distrust, and found that he could not make such a reason honestly. You will place it where none will find it. On my oath of on my oath. Varys opened his hands. I have been telling oaths to the wrong listeners all my life. Let me try to give one to a man who will hold me to it even if he dies. Ned moved the board and brought out the roll and handed it across the table. Varys took it reverently, like a priest receiving an offering not intended for his god. He tucked it away somewhere Ned could not see. He rose. What will she do with me? Ned asked, not masking his weariness with any kind of pride. What people always do with those who do not sing the same song at the same pace, Varys said. She will try to make you small, and if she cannot make you small, she will try to unmake you. But there are intervening measures between now and then. People who believe they can have everything at once often settle for the next thing if you place it in their hands as if it were a baby. I will try to find her a thing to hold which is not you. He paused, and for once his eyes were purely human and not a set of scales. If you had let me, I would have helped you run. You will not let me. You are Ned Stark, and the North lives in you like a tree. It does not run. Very well. Stand, then. But let me move some wind around your trunk. Do what you will, Ned said. I will keep my own counsel too. Varys bowed at the neck and slipped away, a man who had learned to make departure feel like a favor. The door shut. The darkness returned itself to corners. Ned sat and listened to his own breath. He did what the North had taught him to do when the wind howled. He let his thoughts bank. He put his anger like a coal deeper down where it would survive the night, and he told himself the names of his children. In the great distance that is only a few days when a raven flies true, a boy with a white wolf slept in a bed that had different drafts, and a maester folded his hands over a book and considered whether to light another candle or to say the day owed him rest. A white bird stood on the rookery rail and did not move. Above the sea, far south, a ship with a fat-bellied hull leaned into a wind that had not been forecast by any man and so delighted itself at being unexpected. The high steps of the Red Keep, where the dragon skulls no longer hung, remembered briefly the sound of armored boots running up them when men had thought they were chasing Targaryens and found instead they were chasing themselves. Morning did not so much break as arrive politely. Ned washed with cool water that caught the light like small coins. He dressed with the care a man uses when he is not sure which gesture will be read and how. When the door opened, it was not a jailer but Ser Barristan. "My Lord Stark," the old knight said, "the Queen asks for you. She is prepared to hear your confession." "I have none," Ned said.
Se Barristan's mo tuisha.
"We all have at least one." He hesitated. "There is something you should know. Renly Baratheon took horse in the night. His banners with him. They left by the east postern. The Queen is displeased. She will have more cause before the week is out," Ned said. They walked together and for a time spoke of neither law nor treason but of the duller, kinder things men talk about when they know less kind things will be asked of them later. Ser Barristan asked after Ben-Jen with the careful interest of a man who liked younger men and carried too many of them in his memory. Ned told him what he could. Then they were in the presence chamber and the time for small mercies ended. Cersei sat like a lioness sunning herself on a rock that had already warmed. She had dressed for battle in a gown the color of crushed limes that made a mockery of mourning. Her hair lay down her back like something just brushed that intended to snarl again the instant it could. Joffrey kept to her side in a complicated brocaded sadness that had more gold thread in it than honest cloth. Around them arranged themselves the men who wanted to live. There were always more of those. "You may save your house," Cersei said without flirtation or malice. "You may save your daughters. You may even save your neck. It will amuse me to let you live with your shame. But you must kneel and say the words. You must say you lied. You must say Joffrey is the true king. You must say Stannis is a traitor. You must say you were misled by your grief for your old friend. Men will accept that. They like to think grief makes other men fools. It reassures them." Ned looked at the boy. Joffrey's mouth was tight, his jaw set in the way boys set them when they are trying to find a chin in their face. He looked desperately pleased by his mother, but not comforted. Ned thought of the White Wolf and of the way Jon tilted his head when he listened to men lying and made a private note inside himself. He thought of Sansa's rope braids and Arya's bare toes against stone. He thought of promises and of winter and of how a lie is sometimes a kind of fire, useful in the cold and always ravenous. "I will not," he said. Joffrey lifted his chin at that, a child whose defiance has been answered with the opposite. Cersei did not blink. "So you will be brave," she murmured. "Very well. Brave men make such gratifying ghosts." "Do it," Joffrey said high and bright, like a boy crying for a joust. "I am the king. Command it. Bring me his." "Not yet," Cersei said, a hand raised in careless grace, and turned her head to speak aside to Littlefinger, who tipped and smiled and made a mark in his mind as if she had been a ledger and this a column of figures. "We should not dull our own knives by hacking bone. There are cleaner ways to carve." They ordered him back to his rooms with guards who smelled of onions and fear. He went. He sat. He watched the day move itself across stone. He whispered his children's names again. He folded and unfolded Luwin's letter once more until the crease in it felt like a pathway the paper itself would follow even if you threw it into a storm. Night took the city like a man shrugging into a black cloak. And beyond the walls, in streets where the stones were older than anyone living remembered, a creature with a ragged ear and a memory of being chased by a small boy wearing a wooden sword slipped between shadows and made a meal of something someone had left for it. The winds from the sea found a way to creep up the hill and tug at the Red Keep skirts. A barge master thought about an extra cargo and thought better of it. A woman put her hand on her belly and prayed to a god who is nothing but a pool of candle drippings in a cracked saucer. A white raven closed one eye and then the other, and somewhere in a tower beyond the city, beyond the river, beyond the neck of land that had been fought over by men who had long since turned to bone, ravens dozed and then woke as a man in gray wool and ringed throat climbed the stair to send one. He took a strip of parchment and wrote 3 sentences in the hand he had learned when hope still warmed him. He tied them with thread and whispered a name to the bird in a kind way, and then he opened the window and gave the bird to the night. It went. In the morning, the city would be new again, and all its oldness would be hidden under the astonishment people always feel when they wake and find they are still themselves. The bells would be quieter. The meat would taste a little of ashes. The gold cloaks would crack jokes to push away the memory of the men they had struck. Queen would plan. A boy would preen and then go sick in a corner where no one could see him. A man called Varys would glide and leave nothing but the idea of silk. A man called Peter would have a new joke to test in his mind, and he would polish it until it hurt to look at it. And a lord from the north would sit with his leg fouled and his honor unfashionable and his hands empty, and he would be at peace briefly because he had done a thing he could not bear not to have done. He would be at peace because there was a boy far away with a white wolf and a promise wrapped around him like furs. He would be at peace because the season had turned and there is a kind of rest to be had in knowing that the earth has remembered itself again. He would be at peace for as long as peace in this city ever belonged to anyone, which was to say for the space of a breath and the length of a heartbeat and the time it takes a raven to beat its wings twice and find the wind. The day the queen offered him shame in exchange for breath, the city had a brightness to it that seemed to mock the darkness inside the Red Keep. Ned sat long after they took him back, the lamplight dwindling as if wary of spending itself before night proper. When he finally rose, it was to pace the very small distance his leg allowed, from the window to the chair and back, counting the steps because numbers were obedient when men were not. He could feel the grain of the flagstones through his boot, each unevenness a note in a song he could hum without thinking, that soothed him more than any prayer would have. At some hour that wasn't one of the bells, a soft knock came, 2 knuckles against wood, unalarming but insistent. It was not a jailer's knock. He sat, and when the door opened on a sigh, the space filled with the sound of leather and a man trying not to be noticed by his own breath. Ser Barristan Selmy stepped in, closed the door himself, and stood as if he had never in all his life entered a room that had not been a throne room and did not know how to proceed without an audience. He had removed his white cloak. The absence hung about him like a missing limb. "My lord," he said quietly, "I will not stay, nor will I say anything that forces you to give me an answer I must carry away. I have come only to say that I stood at your side in a room when a king's letter was read, and that my oath is to a king. I do not know where the line is drawn when the king's will departs and another's will slips into its place and pretends to be the same shape. I do not know, but I have eyes and I have memory. If you have a thing you would have remembered, give it to me. If you have a thing that must be kept, let me keep it." Ned looked at the old knight's hands. The right knuckles had a scar like a crescent moon. He had noticed it once years ago in a practice yard and had asked, and Barristan had said lightly, "A kitchen boy with a knife. The boy had more to lose than I did." Men who remembered such scars and the boys who gave them were not the worst sort. "I have given it away," Ned said. "It is the sort of thing that turns into a knife no matter whose hand it's in. Better to have it on a shelf in a place I cannot find." Barristan bowed, a dip of the head that was precise and respectful without servility. "Very well, there is one other matter. My dismissal has been spoken of," he said, and made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cough. "If it comes, as I think it will, my feet will be moving of their own accord. I do not know what they will decide to do until they are doing it, but they will not walk me to a place where your blood is required to season the queen's roast. Guard yourself," Ned said. "The world is very free with other people's vows." Barristan's mouth twitched, the ghost of an expression that might have been gratitude if it had had longer to grow. "And yet we keep them," he said, "because we have grown used to carrying a thing. Good night, my lord." When he had gone, the room seemed to Ned to have acquired a weight it had not had before, as if the old knight had left behind a piece of himself carved from some more stubborn stone than ordinary men. He slept at last, poorly, and woke into a thin morning as men woke in winters at Winterfell. Slow, reluctant, feeling for sound before opening their eyes. He could hear the city already, restless, like a horse in a stable that knows it will be ridden too hard. Elsewhere in the castle, the day opened for Arya Stark like a book listens for a familiar thumb. She had run her feet nearly to raw the day before, and Syrio had clucked at her in Bravosi, a language that could make affection sound like the instruction to sharpen knives. Now she stood barefoot on cool stone in a practice room with windows narrow as slits in a visor, watching the dust as it made itself into shafts of light. Syrio was not there yet. She liked to get there first because the room felt more hers when she entered it empty, as if she could whisper a word to the shadows and have them whisper back. When the door opened, it was not Syrio, and the men who stepped in stepped as if they believed the floor belonged to their boots. The first wore white cloak and iron eyes. "Ser Meryn," Arya said, and wished she had not said anything, wished she had kept the name in her mouth where it could not be used to trip her. The others fanned to either side of him, 2 gold cloaks and a man in livery whose face was already apologizing for things it had not done yet. "The hand requires his daughter," Ser Meryn said. "She will come with us." My father would send one of his own men, Arya said, and felt the courage come out of its den to stand in her chest, small and bright. The hand is indisposed, Maren said. You are mistaken, another voice said mildly. It had the sea in it. Sirio Farrell slipped through the narrow gap of the door and into the light, and in an instant the room rearranged itself around him like water remembering how to be a pool after a stone is taken out. He did not look at the guards first. He looked at Arya, and his face softened in a way that would have surprised men who only ever saw his eagle. Today you play the cat, he said in the sing-song of his lessons. Today you are small and sly and very quick. I know the cat, Arya said, and found herself grinning despite the steel in the room. He bit my finger. Then bite back, Sirio said. He looked at Ser Maren and his brown eyes went flat. This child belongs to her father, he said, and his accent made the word father gentler than it was in this place. Who are you to deny a father his child? I am a sworn brother of the Kingsguard, Maren said, and I am Sirio Farrell, first sword of Bravos. Sirio answered as if that should be sufficient to settle the question. Leave us. Maren's mouth made a small movement, not quite a smile, not quite a quiver. Take the girl, he told his men. The gold cloaks moved as men move who have never been told they could be stopped. Sirio's stick, nothing but wood, no edge, no point, blurred. It struck the first guard on the wrist. He yelped and dropped his helm. Before the helm reached the floor, Sirio had struck the second in the knee, collapsing him as neatly as if a hinge had been pulled. He did not look like a dancer, he looked like a thought. Ser Maren drew steel with a rasping pleasure. Run, Sirio said without turning his head. Now. Arya hesitated a moment, a little terrible moment in which she thought about the September, and the way Sansa's hair smelled after Septa Mordain had combed lavender through it, and about the way her father's hand felt on her head when he was watching something and didn't know he was touching her. Then the part of her that had learned to trust the voice that came from a quiet at the center of movement took the next breath for her and made her move. She went for the door, low and small, the cat. A sword whistled above and the hair lifted on her neck without being cut. She bolted into the corridor and against the wall to make herself thin, the way Sirio had taught, and ran. Behind her would met steel with a hard, awkward sound. She did not look back. There is a kind of focus that closes the world to a narrow place directly in front of you and makes the angles of it beautiful, and she had that, and her breaths counted themselves without being asked to count. 2 more gold cloaks appeared around a corner and filled the corridor with the stupid solidity of men in the wrong place. She went right between them, a twist and a slide, and felt one clutch at her sleeve and then lose it. She hit the steps at a leap and turned in the air because she liked the way turning felt and because turning made her small again against the banister. Needle was in her room. Needle mattered more than any doll had ever mattered, more than the good knife in the kitchen that cut bread with the right weight. She went there quick and found the door ajar. The room was not empty. A man stood by her chest with his hand on it, his face set in concentration as if he were about to cut meat. What are you doing? Arya shouted, and the man turned, startled. His mouth half open to say his excuse, and her hand was already under the straw mattress where she had hidden Needle, and then it was in her hand and the room became very simple. He came toward her in the way men come at little girls when they believe little girls should not have difficult objects. She moved the way Sirio had taught her. Step aside. Let the world fall across your shoulder like water. The blade went out of her hand almost by itself. It met cloth and then something softer and then something that caught. She would remember the catching in her sleep for a long time. He made a sound like a surprised bird, a small quirk. He sat down as if a chair had been pulled out for him, and then he lay back, his eyes filled with too much, and then with nothing that could be counted. Arya's breath made her chest ache. She looked at the red on her point, then rubbed it once against the mattress in a foolish half gesture, as if it were jam. Then she ran again. The castle could be a maze if you did not know where the wind came from. Sirio had taught her that too. Follow smells when sound is wrong. Follow drafts when light fails. Remember where your bare feet got cold last time because they will be cold there again. She went down and then down again and found herself near the dragon skulls. The air tasted older here and the dust lay on everything like a patient cat. She took 3 steps into the shadow of a jaw huge enough to swallow her whole and stopped to listen. Footfalls, not armored. Soft-soled, careful. The walk of someone to whom stealth was a comfortable shirt. She flattened, becoming a longer shadow inside a shadow. The steps came closer and then halted. "I know you," a voice said. It had a rasp in it, as if it had been scraped on stone. "Or I know your footsteps. I heard them on the day the Hands men fought in the street. You were following along the wall because you couldn't bear not to see." Arya did not answer. "Come," the voice said. "I have need of a skinny boy to carry a thing, and you are at least half of that." She edged out. The man wore black. His hair was wiry and his face a map of sun and years and weather. His mouth had a stubbornness to it that she recognized. He looked at her with one eye squinted half shut, not because it was damaged but because he measured. "Yoren," she said, and the name pleased him and didn't. She had seen him once before, a crow come down into a kitchen for meat and beer and a place by a hearth. "Good," he said. "You remember men. It's a skill. Come on, boy." "I am not. You are whoever gets out of here," Yoren said. "And right now you're a boy with a burr in his hair who will be called Airy if anyone asks. And I'm taking you north with the rest of the filth the Night's Watch scrapes up from the gutters and the gallows. You want to argue with that? Do it while you walk. But your father will want at least one of you with a breath left to send words back and forth," Yoren said. "Move." She moved. He handed her a bundle that felt like cloth and then a second that felt like wood, heavy with someone else's sweat. The sort of bundle men carry when they are leaving one life and trying to believe another will let them in. He took the lead and did not look back to see if she followed. They went by a route that seemed to occupy a smaller castle under the castle. The ways servants used, and men with business, and rats who had found cause to be discreet. At a door near the kitchens, Yoren paused and turned. "You hold your tongue unless I pull it out of you," he said in a kindly way. "When we go through the yard, you look down. You act like you've got lice. If a dog pisses near you, you move your boot. If a man laughs at you, you scratch. You do not look for sisters. You do not look for mothers. You do not look for princes. You are a boy with fleas and you are mine." Arya nodded and hoped the nod had all the humility he wanted in it. He opened the door and the smell of kitchens rushed them like a crowd. They slid along the edges of clatter and heat, the way minnows slip between a big fish and its shadow. No one looked twice. The yard beyond was a glare of noon and shouting. A chain clanked. Somewhere a man told another man to tighten the girth. Yoren went toward the postern and the watchman there turned his head to spit and did not turn it back until they were past. At the last turn, Arya looked up despite herself. She could not help it. People always think they are in charge of their eyes until something they cannot not look at stands where their eyes must go. She saw the Tower of the Hand, high and pale. She thought she saw a man in one of its windows, a gray figure in a gray place, and then a guard walked between her and the tower and Yoren's hand was on her shoulder, a weight that put her back into the world she had to survive. They went out into the streets and the city hit her like a wave. Smells layered themselves, spices and river rot, flowers and tanneries, hot iron and old cabbage, candle smoke and people. The sound was a woven thing, with bells somewhere distant at its edge and nearer in its warp the human noises of deal-making, flirtation, argument, begging, laughter that wanted to be a weapon and laughter that wanted to be a bandage. Yoren cut left and then left again and then straight into a lane where the air thinned a little. They made for the mud gate. "You'll be safe with me if the gods hate all the same men I do," Yoren said, and she could tell it was as close to comfort as he had learned to offer. Back in the keep, Sansa Stark sat very straight in a small chair, her hands folded in her lap like folded veils. Cersei's chamber had the soft light the queen preferred, a light that made women's skin look like cream and men's faces look a little foolish. Ladies waited along the wall like a row of perfumed scabbards. The queen kept Sansa waiting for the right length of time, which was the length that makes a girl feel as if she has been chosen and tested at once. At last Cersei turned, and her sorrow was beautiful, the way a sunset is beautiful when seen from a distance that keeps you from noticing the burning. "My sweet," she said, "how my heart hurts for you. It must hurt far more for you, because you are so tender." "I only want to be of use," Sansa said, and meant it. She had a purpose in her, a need to bring order to feelings by arranging them like flowers in a vase. "You shall be," Cersei murmured, and led her to a writing table. "You shall save men inconveniences with your pen." Words are such simple tools, aren't they? And yet they will build a tower if you let them. "Write to your brother. Tell him that His Grace King Joffrey longs to see him and to embrace him and to forgive your father for his strange grief. Tell him the king is merciful. Tell him to come and bend the knee so that all may end in garlands and songs. Tell him his sisters miss him. Tell him the city is safe. Tell him winter comes and it is better to be warm near a fire than cold on a field. You will know better than I what to say that will make him love you. It is a woman's gift to know where men's love sits and how to stroke it." Sansa took the quill. Her hand did not shake. She had learned a long time ago that trembling makes men think you are worthless. Stillness makes them think you are valuable. It is not always the same thing. "Septa Mordain says a letter is a mirror," she said, filling the pen. "She says a lady should be careful what face she shows." "She is not wrong," Cersei said in a voice that made it sound as if the Septa could, on a good day, be a utensil. "Show your brother the face that looks most like home." Sansa bent and wrote, and in the writing she felt a small, middling peace. She wrote of the court as if it were a place where people sat in orderly fashion, which it sometimes was for a little while in the afternoons. She wrote of the king as if he were a boy whose tempers were the heat lightning before a storm that never arrives. She wrote to Robb and imagined his eyes on the words, imagined him thinking of the way she had stolen plums out of the bowl in the kitchen when Cat wasn't looking, imagined him setting his jaw and grinning despite himself because she had once made him laugh by imitating their father's voice when he told them to mind. When she had finished, Cersei read and touched the page them with her fingertip as if feeling for splinters. "Sweet," the queen said. "Sweetness is a kind of strength." She sealed the letter and called for a footman. The seal bore a lion. The wax had a slight fragrance. Sansa watched it leave and told herself that her words were a rope thrown across a river and that Robb would catch it and cross into safety. "You may see the king," Cersei said after, and the indulgence sounded like weariness dressed as kindness. "He will want you today. He needs to be seen wanting you." Joffrey waited in a smaller chamber than his mother's. He had dismissed the men he should have kept and kept the men he should have dismissed. When she entered, he leapt up and seized her hand with such eagerness that his fingers hurt. "Sansa?" he said, breathless, and the way he said her name made her believe for 1 second that all the ugly words in the hall had been the fault of iron and shouting, and that when the world was quieter he would remember how to be lovely. "I am here," she said, and knelt, and took his hand to her mouth because it seemed fitting, and because she had read it, and because the ladies in the hall had looked like they wanted to see it done. He flushed with pleasure that overflowed and made him careless. "My mother says we can forgive your father if he begs," he blurted. "She says kings who are merciful are loved. I shall be merciful. Tell him to say he lied. Tell him to be sorry. Then I will make him serve me and everyone will see I am great." He stopped, panting like a boy after a race, triumphant in the way boys are triumphant when they have won something on a field marked out for games. Sansa took his hand in both of hers. "You are great," she said delicately, gravely, as if measuring a precious spice. "And mercy will make men write songs about you that women will sing to their children forever." She felt something in herself become thinner, a skin stretched on a drum, and it made a sound she both admired and feared. He smiled and then, just as quickly, he frowned. "Mother says I must not be soft. She says soft kings are knives other men keep in their kitchens." "She is wise," Sansa murmured. "But you are wise too, your grace. You will know which is softness and which is strength that feels like softness." He looked relieved, as if she had taken a weight out of his hands and told him he had held it properly after all. He waved a hand. "Go to your rooms," he said. in a voice that tried to be kingly and almost was. "Stay there. It will keep you safe. Do not go tootling about." She bowed. She went to her rooms. She sat for a long time after Septa Mordain had bedded down, listening to the hush at the center of the castle, the hush that all the shouting made without knowing it. At the hour she had promised her father, the maid came and cleared her throat and looked at the floor and said there were men in the corridor who said they had been sent to take Sansa to the September. The maid's eyes flicked once to the window in a way that was not the way a southerner's eyes flick to a window. It was the way a northerner's eyes measure dark against a story of snow. Sansa stood. "It is best," she said aloud to no one, and the words, floating, were not sure whether to become true and settle or to dissolve like breath. She took her cloak. She did not take a hood. Hoods made her hair a secret, and secrets were bait. In the corridor, men waited with the manners of men who intend to escort a lady courteously to a place where she will not be permitted to do the thing she intended. Tomard stood with them like a tree inside a fence. His eyes met hers and then did not meet hers. He nodded once. They walked. The air had a clean night's edge, like a blade that has just been set down on oiled leather. They turned toward the sept and then away from it and then toward the river, the way a fox crosses its own tracks. The maid walked behind, a small presence with her hands folded as if she were praying the prayer called, "Make me into someone else for the next half hour." They came near the postern gate. A pair of gold cloaks appeared as if from behind a panel and blocked the way without drawing blades. The captain had a face like a chopping block, useful, not personal. "My lady is unwell," Tomard said in a voice that could have been faith or could have been gambling. "The air of the river is a remedy we trust from the north." "The city is not safe at night," the captain said, "nor is the river." He did not look at Sansa. He looked at Tomard, where the decision would be weighed. Men often forgot the women in a negotiation until a woman complained, and Sansa had learned you can travel through men's forgetfulness as if through a hidden passage. She looked past the captain at the strip of sky and thought of her father's hand upon her hair. A footstep sounded that was like silk trying to be a footstep. Peter Baelish stepped from the shadow of the wall, smiling the way men smile when they meet children in corridors at night. "Tomard," he said pleasantly, "you must be more careful with your instructions. The sept is down the other way. I would be pleased to escort the Lady Sansa to prayer and back. It will be an honor I shall retell at tedious length to ladies who like to be bored." Tomard said nothing. The captain shifted. Peter took a step forward, and the gold cloaks, without being told to do so with words, stepped aside for him. He offered Sansa his arm. "My lady," he said, "do you trust me?" She looked at his face. It was handsome in the way knives are handsome when their edges are exact. She knew he had been friendly to her father. She knew he had not kept her father's men from bleeding. She knew he won games he did not announce he was playing. "I trust the gods," she said softly. "Prudent," he murmured, and offered his arm again. She took it not because she wished to but because the alternative was to wrench the night into a shout. He walked with her to the sept and stood aside, the picture of courtesy, while she knelt and pretended to pray and did, despite herself, actually pray. When they emerged, he bowed again. "Thank you for letting me live in the story," he said lightly. "It improves a dull evening." They went back the correct way. The river dark lay behind them like a promise that remembered having been made. In the Tower of the Hand, Ned slept badly again, and when he woke it was to find Varys in the chair by the window, folding and unfolding his hands like a man who has learned to fold complicated paper and finds it soothing. The eunuch watched Ned's face arrange itself into wakefulness. "Your younger daughter is mislaid," he said in a voice without triumph. "Your elder is not. Yoren has added one more stray to his collection. He will call the child Aerie and spit at anyone who calls the child anything else. The road is a cruel tutor and a faithful one. I cannot promise her fingers will all be the same shape when she arrives wherever she arrives, but I think they will all still be hers." Ned's breath went out. It did not come back at once. When it did, it carried with it an old gratitude he had not expected to feel in this city again. "Sansa?" he asked. "Under a mother's branch," Varys said. I do not need to tell you how close branches come to becoming cages in spring. Ned closed his eyes and pictured it, because men will picture a pain even when they know it will not change into anything else for being pictured. Then he opened them and set them back on the eunuch. Why do you tell me anything? Truly. Varys relaxed a little in the manner that indicates a man has been permitted to wear his actual face for a moment. Because a realm made only of wolves and lions would be an ugly place. Because whatever else you are a north wind, and I remember what it is to breathe such air. Because I like balance, and the queen is not fond of that word. Because a promise was written on a paper that smells faintly of poppy and king, and it would be a pity to let all of it become nothing. Because I am a coward, he added almost cheerfully. And cowards survive long enough to tidy up after brave men have done their work and died of it. Let me save your elder daughter if I can. Kneel when they ask. Say the words. You despise objections. This one will not kill you. It may keep a pretty child from growing old too fast. Ned looked back out at the city he had not learned to love. If he gave them words, they would tie a rope to them and pull him through streets with it. He thought of Sansa's face when she had told him she would make him proud. He thought of Arya's bare feet, the way she would not put on shoes when she meant to run. He thought of a boy at the end of the world training under a wall of ice that older men whispered about as if it were a patient beast that would wake soon. I will think, he said. Do it quickly, Varys said, rising. The queen has a taste for immediate pleasures. It is one of the few honest things about her. When he had gone, Ned sat a while and made himself look at his fear until it shrank to something he could hold in both hands. Then he bowed his head and tried to pray to the old gods in a place where their faces had been chipped off the trees and their eyes had been turned into furniture. He did not know if anyone heard. He did it anyway. When he opened his eyes, he was not free of dread. He was only its master for the next hour. Sometimes that was enough. Far away, where the sea made its patience into waves against a black shore, the great basalt shapes of Dragonstone lifted their dark heads out of mist. In a chamber that liked heat and did not wish to keep it, Stannis Baratheon stood like a judgment in a poorly swept hall. He held a parchment in one hand and did not crumple it because it was, despite everything, a thing written by a man he had once laughed beside. Eddard Stark says the king is dead and named him protector, he said without turning. He says the law makes me heir. Davos Seaworth shifted his weight and scratched at his beard with fingers that had fewer bones than other men's fingers. Eddard Stark says the thing he believes, he offered carefully. He keeps to straight roads. Straight roads are dull, a woman's voice said from the other side of the fire. It was warm and it was not, but they arrive where they intend. Melisandre of Ashai wore red as if red had been made to clothe her. Her eyes held the reflections of the coals the way a pool holds the sky. She watched Stannis as a cat watches a flame. Hungry, not for the flame but for what it draws. Robert is dead, Stannis said again, as if trying to read the letters a different way might yield a different message. Renly has gone to play at banners. The Lannister woman has put her whelp on a chair. The law is a cudgel. I have carried it long for other men. I will carry it for myself. Davos shifted again, uncomfortable with prophecy and with kings and with the way words pick up edges in certain rooms. If you raise your standard now, he said, every man who hates the Lannisters will have somewhere to send his hate. If you wait, every man who loves his skin will say he cannot remember where he put his courage. Stannis looked down at the parchment and then at the seal impression. The boar's head sunk deep. He was not a man who gloated. He was a man who kept accounts. Draft letters, he said curtly, to all lords who once loved Robert more than his wife. To Lord Manderley, Lord Hoster, Lord Aaron's widow, to the veil through her though she will choke on it. To the Stormlands who have eaten at my table and then had the salt blown out of their mustaches by my brother's laughter. To the north, he paused a shade. Stark will be in irons soon. Send one to his son. He will be fool enough to march. Fools make history when the wise sleep. And to Lord Tywin? Davos asked gently. To Lord Tywin we send nothing, Stannis said. He writes his own letters with steel. The answer will be at the mouth of the Mummer's Ford. I will see if I read it correctly. Melisandre smiled. It was not the sort of smile that yields comfort. The night is long, she murmured, almost to the fire. You will need the heat. Keep your flames, Stannis snapped, and then, after a small breath that might have been an apology in a poorer man, keep them if they light the letters. On the wall, which is not a place men visit so much as a thing men are taken by. Jon Snow woke to ghosts standing over him, breath cold and even on Jon's face. He lifted a hand and the wolf lowered his great head into it, a weight and a warmth that anchored Jon more than any stone wall could. Outside, men were scraping ice from stone and from beards, laughing and swearing, an intimate sound for such a desolation. The sky had the flat look of days when weather keeps its mind to itself. Up, Gren said, pushing his head in at the flap. Ser Aliser's voice is making a coat for the whole yard. Jon dressed quickly. The motions had become a habit that had folded himself into himself until he no longer thought about each tie and knot and glove. He stepped out into the light with the others, Ghost a white slice in shadow. The yards had the particular smell of men who must live near each other and have learned to forgive that fact. Samwell Tarly was already there, cheeks pink, eyes determined with the sort of courage that is built by notice and nurtured by love. He smiled at Jon in the way men who have been saved smile at the man who saved them and then tried to be casual about it. They say a white raven came to Maester Aemon, Sam said, breath making small puffs. They say summer is done. Jon nodded. He had felt it in his bones already, but men like to have their bones told truths by birds because it makes the ache important. He set his hands on the top rail and looked out past the yard to where the world went away into iced trees that stood like silent ranks of something no one had been introduced to yet. Somewhere a far horn blew once, small and questioning. Ghost's ears pricked. "Do you think your father will write?" Sam asked timidly. "He has much to write with his hands and more placed in them than is right," Jon said, and even saying it he had not meant to speak in such measure. He did not like to think of Winterfell without him, of the way morning light fell in the first winter snow and made everything look as if it were made of milk, of the hollow sound of his father's boots through the great hall. He did not like to think of Sansa's careful smiles and Arya's scuffed knees and Bran's eyes. He did not like to think of any of it because thinking did not change it. But the thought came and stood at his shoulder the way Ghost stood. He bore it. Maester Aemon came out, white upon white, and the yard stilled. Even the men who did not believe in wisdom believed in age. He lifted a hand. "It is done," he said simply. "The raven says what our bones knew. Summer has ended." The words fell soundlessly. The men looked at each other for a moment, uncertain of who they were in a new season. Then the work resumed, because work is a comfort in the face of things that do not ask our blessing. Jon went to the practice yard and took up a blade that did not fit him, because nothing at the wall is the size of the man you think you are. He fought not to be better than the boys around him, but to be the man he had promised himself he would be when he had left a place that never quite made a place for him. Afterward, he stood with Ghost by the god's wood that was no wood at all, a single pale tree whose face had not been cut. The sap in it ran slow and a different color than men like to see. He put his hand to the bark and closed his eyes. When he opened them, Donal Noy was standing with his arms folded, black and adamant, one arm a memory and one real. "Word will come to you," he said, in the way of a man who believed that announcing fate was the same as helping with it. "It comes to men who have made themselves noticeable to themselves." Jon nodded. "There are words like that which you do not catch with your mouth. You let them pass through you and they leave you a little cleaner. In King's Landing, men made themselves noticeable. Cersei Lannister called the small council and made it smaller with her presence. She dismissed Ser Barristan in a way that let all the watching men feel a little taller when he left, which was an art, and she had spent years practicing it. She called the old knight forward and spoke of weary bones and younger arms and the mercy a queen shows for a faithful servant who has carried too much for too long. Baristan watched her with a serenity that came from having imagined something like this occurring every day of his service and finding it underwhelming in its actual shape. "I am not tired," he said in a voice that made the room feel like a hall where history is read aloud. "I am the only man here who is not tired of my vows." Cersei smiled as if the line amused her, and it did. "Leave your cloak," she said, as if asking him to lay a shawl across the back of a chair. He took it off with the care of a man removing skin. He folded it, and the folding itself was a visible lesson, the sort of thing squires learn by watching a thing done properly. He set it on the table as if it weighed a great deal. "I have been in rooms like this when kings died," he said conversationally. "I have learned to recognize the smell of men dressing corpses in their own clothes to dance them." "Go," Joffrey said, in a high eagerness to show his mouth could give orders. "You smell like old leather. Ser Meryn will guard me now. Ser Boros will guard me. The Hound will guard me." Baristan looked at the boy for exactly the length of a heartbeat longer than was politic, and then he turned and walked out. He did not look at the faces on either side. He did not take his sword, which lay upon the table. Men watched it lie and thought of stories they had been told, and of how most of those stories had been polite lies disguised as compliments. When the door had closed, the council reorganized themselves in their seats as men do when power has arranged itself and they must find new places in its shade. Cersei's gaze took them in like a seamstress fitting cloth. "We are done with old men who think promises have weight," she said. "We are making a new set of promises. They will be lighter. They will be easier to wear. Lord Baelish, see that the gold cloaks have coin enough to make them like the way they are saluted when they wear their helmets. Varys, see that rumors run as they should. Grand Maester, brew me a sleep that has dreams in it that are not of boars. My head aches." Peter bowed from the shoulders. "It will be done, and it will be as if it were always so," he murmured. Varys inclined his head as if to an equal. Pycelle bowed so low his beard touched the floor, and he did not notice because his back had stiffened where it shouldn't. "And the hand?" Joffrey asked, still high with his power and its quick delights. "I am bored of waiting. He should be made to. Men must see." "They will see," Cersei said lazily, "but not until I have had from him what I want. When a man has pride and daughters, you can use one to wear down the other. He will say what we tell him. He will cry it to the sky if I tell him Sansa will be free. He will keep her safe in words if he cannot keep her safe with his hands. And then," she added almost idly as if to herself, "we will choose our season." That evening, Varys went to a place that was not a room exactly, more a hollow inside the castle, built by absent men to accommodate the needs of a later age. He moved in the way of a man who knows that the house itself has ears and who might be on speaking terms with them. In a niche behind a pile of unused cordage, he knelt, lifted a stone with both hands, and slid the roll of Robert's second paper into a crack dark as any night. He lowered the stone, and the sound it made fitting back into place was the sort of sound one remembers later at odd times, like the sound of a child's first cry or the final cough of an old man. He sat back and wiped his hands together, more from habit than need. "You will keep," he told the stone. "You will be a secret spine. If I am killed, you will be found by no one, which is a kind of victory. If I live, I will decide later whether this is worth letting the world trip over." He smiled to himself without joy. "The boy is far," he said into the dark. "Far is not safe. Far is only far." He stood and went to find a rumor that needed trimming. On the third day after Robert's death, the White Raven came to the Red Keep, and men who never saw such birds except in stories craned to look at it. It stood in the rookery like a priest who has opinions about younger priests. Its eyes were old and its beak was as pale as a moon at dawn. When it flew, it did not look like a bird. It looked like a sentence being carried to its subject. The bird went to places men had forgotten about for years and then suddenly remembered. It went to Winterfell, where Maester Luwin received it with the careful hands of a man who knows he is handling an announcement he cannot wring meaning out of with his own fingers. He sent to Robb, who had learned in a short summer to carry his father's quiet with some competence. Rob came, long-legged, with Theon beside him making a joke that did not arrive properly. They listened. "Summer's done," Rob repeated softly, and his voice changed as he said it, grew an edge as if it had been drawn once across a whetstone. "Then we had better be busy." He read Sansa's letter 3 times. He had refused to read it the first time, turning away and asking Luwin to put it aside while he walked the length of the gallery twice, as if he could burn off the words with the same effort that put heat into his legs. Then he had read, and his face had grown a look that Catelyn Tully had once named when he was 10. A look that meant no one would move him from a thing unless they were willing to break him and bear the guilt of the breaking. He finished and laid his hand flat upon the table. "She says to come," he said. "She says the king will forgive. She says the city is safe. She says father lied." His mouth worked for a moment around that. "She is frightened." They made her write this with her eyes and her wanting to please, and they breathed over her shoulder as she did it. They made her words into a net. "I will not be caught in it. She is my sister, but I am my father's son." "The river is high," Theon said lightly, and then, seeing Rob's glance, grew more serious. "If they ask you to bend your neck to save a sister, it is not a request, it is the first cut. Sailors know what a first cut means. It means the rope will not hold when the wind comes. It is better to cut it on your own terms and tie a new one if you must." Maester Luwin placed his hands flat on the table too, fingers ringed with the quiet iron of his order. "There may be a way to answer without throwing yourself into their circle. Send a letter back. Say you come to honor the king's peace by carrying men to where oaths are kept. Send Lord Karstark and his sons south to sit at Moat Cailin and gather men to that place until we see what snakes move in the undergrowth." Rob listened in the way of men whose listening outpaces their urgencies. He nodded. "Call the banners," he said then, a little wonder in his voice, as if the words tasted different in his own mouth than they had in other men's stories. "All of them. We ride." Luwin bowed his head, relief and worry together. "I will see to it." The hall grew a sound that had not lived there in Rob's lifetime. The step and breath of men arriving with their loyalties and their histories and their mistakes. The great oaken doors opened and closed. The dogs noticed and became more themselves. Old songs that had not been sung except by women to babies found their way back into men's throats and acquired a different rhythm. The great John struggled with the door as if the door belonged to a rival he intended to best in front of a crowd. He laughed when he saw the boy and then stopped laughing when he saw the man. "You've got your father's look when he's thinking of something hard," the great John announced. "Good. Something hard is on its way. The South has sent letters asking for kisses." "I have brought teeth." Rob smiled and then didn't. He spoke calmly. The tone of a man who knows calm makes people believe the water is shallower than it is. "We go," he said, "to answer the South and to find my father. I will not promise anyone I shall kneel. I will promise that I shall not leave my sister in a room with her hair braided and men speaking for her until I have spoken for her as a brother ought." The great John grinned, liking the taste of the words. He said, "will make a story of it if we don't die of it." Catelyn was not there to catch at his sleeve and moderate him. She was at Riverrun, where Hoster Tully's breath rasped like leaves in dry wind and Edmure paced like a man trying to wear a groove in stone in the shape of his worry. She read a different letter. Riverrun got its own share of newsmen, peddlers, and ill-sorted truths, and she pressed her mouth together until it became a line that reminded men of her father. She thought of her husband in a tower and felt the old helpless anger that had driven her to seize Tyrion Lannister on a road because he had been a thing she could take hold of with her hands. She went to the Godswood at Riverrun and sat under a tree whose face had been worn to kindness by centuries of soft weather, and she put her hand upon the root the way she put it upon her sons' heads when fever had taken them. "Keep them," she told whatever might be listening, with the ferocity of women who have fed too many mouths with the same care and cannot bear the thought of any of them going empty. "Or let me have the strength to tear apart what stands between us." In King's Landing, days became a pageant of pretense, a talent the city possesses the way alleys possess rats. The Boy King received men with his new voice that had not settled to any tone yet. The Queen sat and made the shape of power, which is a shape that changes between morning and evening if you are not careful. The hound stood and looked like doom without caring to perform it. Sandor Clegane had never had to act to frighten men. His face had done it for him since he was small. He watched the girl Sansa when she came and knelt and spoke in that clear, careful way she had been taught, and found himself disliking the way other men looked at her, some with malice that enjoyed the idea of her breaking, some with that other thing men have that is less honest even than malice. He stood a little closer when she stood. She looked up at him once, briefly, and he looked away because he did not know what to do with a look that expected decency from him. Later, he kicked a man in the gut for speaking of her as if she were dried fruit in a winter store, and he did it where no one noticed and then felt ashamed for caring whether anyone had noticed. The day came when Cersei decided that words must be made to kneel in public. She sent for Ned Stark. The rumor ran ahead of the summons the way a shadow runs ahead of a man at sunset. In the Tower of the Hand, Ned sat and touched the place on the floor where the board had loosened under his fingers, and where a roll of parchment had felt like a living thing. He thought of the boy on the wall, of Sansa's careful hand, of Arya's quickness. He thought of the sort of man he had been when he rode south and of the sort of man this city had tried to make him. And then he stood when the guards came, because there are times when the only thing left to a man is the way he stands. They brought him down into the streets because theatricality has its uses. The crowd was a body composed of 100 smaller bodies, each with their own dirty boots, their own worries, their own attachments to the idea of kings. The September of Baelor rose like a promise men keep making and breaking. Cersei had arranged everything like a woman arranging a room for guests she does not mean to let into her kitchen. The dais stood, the boy upon it, the council, the heads of houses that matter in a city and the mouths of peddlers that matter more. Ned lifted his head and saw, at the very edge of the crowd, a hooded figure lean to a boy with a thatch of chopped hair and whisper a single word, "Baelor." The boy looked up. His gaze met Ned's, and the world narrowed to the distance between them. He gave the slightest shake of his head, almost nothing, almost a blink. Ned did not know he could still feel relief that sharp. He looked away before the crowd could discover what he was looking at. He had given them so very little to eat. He would not give them that too. Varys stood at his shoulder, smelling of something like cloves that had been denied sugar. "It is time," he murmured. "Yes," Ned said. He let the guards take him forward. He let his leg drag where it would, but he did not allow it to become a stumble. He did not look at Cersei. He did not look at the hound. He looked at the boy, and he looked at the sky, and he looked at the place where Sansa stood in her rope braids with her mouth set in a line that would have been a woman's mouth if it had not been trembling. He knelt when they told him to. The stones under his knees were warm with the day's heat. He could smell dust and oil and the faint, old scent the September kept of almond and prayer. He heard his own breath. He heard a gull. Ser Island Payne drew nearer with the slowness of a man who enjoys obliging the world to match his pace. Joffrey stepped forward and spread his arms slightly in the way of a boy who wishes to seem benevolent and fears he will not. Cersei stood with her mouth curved as if to suggest to nearby eyes that this was a thing she regretted more than she let on. "Confess," she said, and the word was not a request. Ned raised his head. He found Sansa's eyes again and held them just long enough to tell her, without words, that he loved her in the old northern way which does not believe in flourishes. He turned his head to the boy king. He knew what words he would give them. He knew what they would do with them. He was a man who had once believed words could be placed in a house where they would stay. He had learned better. But there are causes for which a man spends gold he does not have because the child in his house needs bread tonight. He took a breath and felt the stones under his knees again and the air in his chest and the fact of his own mouth. "I," he said, and his voice went up to the stones and down into the crowd both. "Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Hand of the King, confessed to treason. I conspired to unseat the rightful King Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name. I was led by envy and grief. I am sorry. I ask the king's mercy, which is great." There is a kind of roar that men make when they have been given the food they expected. The sound came up like heat. Cersei's eyes closed briefly. Relief, yes, and something like hatred of relief because she would have liked to fight and a clean excuse. Sansa made a sound like the first surprised cry of a woman in labor, half pain, half faith. Varys let breath out through his nose, as if someone had told him the price of a thing was less than he feared. Peter Baelish's mouth shifted very slightly, not to smile but to accommodate a new calculation. Joffrey felt a great power in his chest at the words. He looked at his mother. He remembered a hallway in which she had told him that kings are not men who do as they are told. He straightened in the way a boy straightens when a teacher he hates enters the room. "My mother asks that you be sent to the wall," he said, loudly enough that the words rolled to the ends of the square and came back. "That you live your life in black, so I may show my mercy to the realm." He paused. He looked at Sansa's face and saw in it a look that made him feel like something had happened inside him that he had not ordered. Then he turned his head suddenly, and his young cruelty, which had no patience with delayed satisfactions, woke like a hound kicked from sleep. "But I am king," he cried, with something too high in his voice, "and the king says treason is death. Ser Island, bring me his head." The world tilted on a hinge. For a heartbeat it did not move. In that heartbeat men thought 1,000 things. That the law should be a wall, that the boy should be kissed, that the mother should be stopped, that the sword would look very clean and then very dirty and then very clean again when it was wiped. Then the hinge dropped and the world ran. Cersei's mouth opened on an intake of rage and fear that would burn her throat for a day. Varys's hand moved without seeming to move at all. Peter did not move any part of his body except a muscle in his cheek, which twitched as if pricked. The hound took one step that put him between Sansa and sight. Ser Barristan was not there to do anything at all. Ned lifted his chin. He had not expected the mercy. He had not expected this either. He had expected something else. Exile, a cell, a long bargaining in which his daughter would be used as a rope tugged at both ends. He saw, in the corner of his eye, a small, hooded figure at the edge of the square turn and vanish like a fish into weed. He felt the heat of the stones. He watched the sword rise. He thought of snow that hushes everything and of the way it smells when the first flake melts on your tongue. He did not think of his own head. Men who have carried a house inside their chest all their lives do not believe that the house can be lifted and dropped. They believe in the weight of it in the way a man believes in his own name. When the sword fell, the September of Baelor made no sound except the sound of a blade through air. The crowd took up the noise afterward, the way a storm will sometimes echo itself after the thunder, as if the sky is learning what it has just done. In the moment between the fall and the echo, a single white feather loosened from a white raven that had been perched improbably on the edge of a cornice. It drifted down through sun and dust and warmth, and for the length of that drift it was the most important thing in the world. Touched stone. It lay. After, the city continued because cities do. Men bought meat. Women washed a child. A man in a red cloak wrote a letter in a hand that would be noticed by men who knew how to notice. A little girl with her hair hacked unevenly ate a crust that tasted of ash and tree bark and found it good enough. A young king vomited in a corner where no one saw him and then stood up straight and went to be looked at again. A queen put her hand slowly upon her throat and did not touch it. Varys moved like a rumor. He went to a room where a woman with hair like a spill of gold sat very straight and stared at nothing. "Your Grace," he said softly. "Not now," Cersei said. Her voice was very even. She might have been asking a maid to send away a dish she did not want today. "I am very busy regretting something." "It will pass," Varys murmured. She turned her head with the creak of a mind that had been used hard. "Everything does. That is the cruelty of it and the kindness." He bowed and withdrew. He had nothing to offer her. She had nothing to take. He had other tasks. He went to the place where the stone had swallowed a paper and pressed both hands to it as if to feel whether it had grown warmer. On Dragonstone, a man in a crown he had not yet made looked at a fire and did not see pictures. He saw fuel. He held a letter written by Peter Baelish in a hand that had been still when others shook. The letter spoke plainly of what had been done in a square far away and of how the heads on the walls had begun to argue with the heads inside men's collars. Stannis read it without expression and folded it and put it away. They killed a man who asked their mercy, Davos said dully. They killed a man who had the wrong daughter in the wrong room, Stannis said. He went to the table carved in the shape of Westeros and placed his hand upon the place that was the Crownlands. Send the letters. Double the ink. Send to the Stormlands first. Tell them a woman has made a boy into a sword and swung him. They will not like that. Send to the north. Say I will take no man's daughter for a pledge. Say I will make a wall of law and stand in it myself. Melisandre's eyes warmed. Good, she said. The night will bite your hands. Keep them around the thing that burns. Davos looked at the fire and thought of boats at night, of the way men look at a lantern on the deck of another ship, hoping it belongs to a friend and knowing it probably doesn't. And Lord Tywin? He pressed. Because you always have to ask the question that has no good answer if you mean to live long among sailors and kings. Stannis did not smile, but something like humor, dry and without sweetness, passed under his skin. We will meet him in a field, he said, or he will send his son to meet me. I will break one or be broken by the other. It is of little moment which we begin with. At Winterfell, the ravens took wing like words being thrown. Robb watched them go and felt something in him break and make him bigger. He turned and called for his horse. Grey Wind, Theon said, mischief in his voice designed as a bomb. You should name him Hurry, for the way you run to do things. Robb looked at him, and Theon, who could read men when he wasn't busy reading himself, shut his mouth and went to see that the straps were sound. They rode. Northmen riding like wind finds hollows in the hill. The banners unfurled like tongues tasting the air. The land that had known them all their lives lifted its head to watch them pass. Women stood in doorways and did not weep until the men were out of sight. Boys carried water and grinned, and then looked down at their hands to hide the grin because they wanted to look like the men they were serving. Old men went into sheds and made sure that the tools hung straight on their hooks, because order is a kind of courage. Luwin stood on the wall and watched them dwindle. He thought of a boy with a white wolf who had chosen the cold on purpose, and of two girls in a city that wanted them for different reasons. He did not think of himself, which is why he was a good maester. He went down to the rookery and fed a bird. South, the road out of King's Landing turned into ruts and ruts turned into scars. Yoren's band tramped and murmured and stank and lived. Arya walked among them with her head down and learned to say nothing even when she wanted to say everything. She learned the names of smells that never came to Winterfell kitchens, the particular odor of bad ale in a hot skin, the sharpness of onion gone old in a bag, the iron of men who had carried shackles too long. She learned how to tie a bundle so it did not pull at one shoulder more than the other. She learned how to sleep with a knife somewhere it would be the first thing her hand found when her mind still believed itself dreaming. She said the names still, the ones she had taught herself. The men who had struck her father's men. The queen, the pretty woman who smiled and hurt with the same expression. The boy who had ordered a thing and then gone pale with it. A knight with a white cloak and a mouth that did not know shame. She did not yet say the name she had loved all her life. She could not put it into that litany. She could not make it a prayer. She kept it elsewhere, inside a box she carried and did not open unless she was alone. At night she and Yoren sat near the edge of the camp because edges were where he liked to be, and he showed her how to scrape a blade without taking off more than the blade could afford. He did not speak of fathers. He did not speak of girls. He spoke of north and of walls and of the way the wind will sometimes change at a gate as if it has made up its mind about something. You keep your feet, he told her. Horses are not to be trusted and men less so. Keep your feet. Keep your eyes. Keep your knife. Don't tell the wrong story to the wrong ear. I know who the wrong ears are, Arya said. You think you do, Yoren grunted. You'll learn the rest. You're young enough to learn without dying of it. Maybe. In the city, Sansa learned a different schooling. Queens do not have classes. They have mornings. She sat and listened and watched and remembered. She learned which ladies brought gossip that could be used and which brought gossip that had to be appreciated the way one appreciates embroidery done by a child, by making a sound and then putting it aside. She learned that Ser Marin liked figs and that Ser Boros hated pears, and that neither man had a taste for truth or mercy. She learned that the hound could be spoken to if no one else was listening, and that he would mock her and then, afterward, stand where a sword would have gone if one had been swung. At night she lay in her bed with the covers drawn up and her hands folded like a small, determined nun, and she prayed to the seven with the exactness of a girl who has been taught to pray and wishes to do it well. She prayed for her father, and then she stopped and started that prayer again because she could not find a place in it where it did not hurt. She prayed for Arya, and it felt like pushing a boat off a bank into a river she could not see. But she pushed anyway and then imagined the boat moving with surprising steadiness. She prayed for Robb, and the name made her feel at once older and younger. She prayed for Joffrey because some part of her believed that prayers could improve anything, and she found that the prayer she made did not sit well in her mouth, and she made it again and again until it did, the way one rewrites a sentence that will not be said properly. On some nights, the queen came to sit on the edge of her bed like a beautiful aunt, and spoke in a voice that made Sansa feel as if she were being bathed in warm milk. "You will survive if you are soft," Cersei told her once. "Soft like silk, not soft like porridge. Silk can strangle if you pull it through a ring. Porridge only feeds men." Sansa nodded and tried to understand what kind of silk she was meant to be. On other nights, the queen did not come, and Sansa was grateful without quite knowing why. Peter Baelish passed through those rooms too, sometimes in person, sometimes by rumor. He kept his distance from Sansa when other men watched and drew near when no one did. He said things like, "There is a way out of any tangle if you tug on the right thread. And you should learn which of your smiles are expensive. And the hound is more honest than any white cloak." He liked to see her eyes widen and then narrow. He liked to be the man who put a new coin into a purse. He would have liked to show her a way out that shackled her to him. He would have liked it very much. He did not yet. He was patient when patience made him richer. The city's mood altered as moods do, not all at once but in the way milk sours. A slow business until suddenly it is a different thing. Bread grew dearer. The gold cloaks grew bolder. Men began to speak in corners of a wolf with a crown in the north, and of a stag gone to ground on an island, and of a lion's growl growing thin. Songs changed key. The small folk, who keep a city alive no matter who eats the feasts, watched with the same care they used for bread rising. They began to put away a coin under their pallets, not for winter as they had once thought, but for a night they would need to run out their own doors. They began to speak the names of lords in tones that could be turned to mockery if ears were unfriendly. The queen heard those tones sometimes, in the hush between sentences, and felt a kind of excitement that had nothing to do with joy. She had always liked danger because danger made her feel as if her blood were better than other people's blood. It learned faster, heated more evenly. One late afternoon, sunlight slanting like late honey through the windows, Ser Lancel Lannister came to Cersei breathless and pale and tried to speak easily and failed. "Your Grace," he panted. Lord Stannis writes, "Ravens turned the air black at the postern gate. He sends letters to half the city. He says," he swallowed. "He says the queen's children are the seed of her brother and not the king." Cersei reached for her cup, found it empty, and smiled at Lancel as if to reassure him they were in a farce together. "And does he tell them how he knows what my bed has done?" she asked. "Or only what his nose has guessed?" "He cites hair and eyes, your grace. He cites the late hand's investigations. He cites the seven. He cites..." Lancel faltered as her look turned sharp. "He cites what will make men feel brave when they whisper to each other." Cersei laughed. It sounded like a spear striking a shield. "Men love to feel brave," she said. "We will take their courage and sew it to their fear. We will make a cloak of it, and the boy shall wear it." Varys read the same letter by candlelight and pressed his lips together thoughtfully. "Ah, Lord Stannis," he murmured. "You could be a tailor if you had any taste. The stitches are sound. The cloth chosen without thought for the man who must wear it. And yet it will cover many. It will cover the right ones, perhaps." He folded the letter and slid it under other papers which would themselves be slid under others, and finally put into a place in his mind where things are accounted for with a kind of skeletal accuracy. Then he went to warn the queen that the city would change again, the way rivers do when someone drops a log upriver and it turns and wedges somewhere and the whole water must learn a new path. In the camps forming like mold on bread along the green fork and the red, banners tangled in the wind, and men learned to live in the intimacy of war, the closeness of bodies, the constancy of small discomforts, the suddenness of the knife. Robb Stark rode the lines and made his voice a thing the men could touch. He learned to say the things his father had said and meant, and he learned to make men believe him when he said he would do a thing because he had no choice. He spoke with Roose Bolton, who listened as if he were counting while other men talked. He spoke with the Karstarks, who wanted vengeance more than they wanted bread. He spoke with young men who looked at him with eyes that made him feel the weight of a house he had not known he had lifted until it was already on his shoulders. He spoke with Theon Greyjoy, who made jokes like a man making kindling from furniture, good-natured with the ease of someone who has not yet had to choose between his blood and his love. The white raven's feather had long since blown from the steppe of the September of Baelor and been ground into dust by the feet of men who had their own errands. The night stretched. The city kept its secrets and shared others freely. Somewhere under a stone lay a paper that spoke of a child far away with a white wolf and a promise wrapped around him like a cloak. The paper did not know the shape the world would have when it was read, if it were ever read at all. It lay and kept its own counsel the way cold things do. Snow fell on the wall, light and dry, and made a sound men begin to love if they listen long enough. The sound of layers, of the world making beds for itself. Jon stood with Ghost and watched it for a time between drills, and then went back to hit and be hit by men who would be his brothers. He slept and dreamed not of the Red Keep but of a stair that went down into earth and of a door that opened into night. He woke with the taste of cold on his tongue and found it good. Sansa learned to walk through rooms without touching anything. Arya learned to sleep on stone and wake when a man's breath changed near her. Robb learned that the sound of men dying is not a single sound but many small ones, overlapping, spilling, hard to count. Cersei learned that hate is a draft that tastes different in the morning than it did at night. Stannis learned that letters bite back. Peter learned a new way to say perhaps. Varys learned a new path in the dark and took it as if he had always known it was there. What any of them learned would not keep them from the next hurt. But learning is a weapon too, and the night had grown long enough that men reached for whatever they could hold. The bells in the city rang at odd hours now, out of sync, as if the hands that pulled them had grown distracted. The bread lines lengthened, the laughter shortened. The Boy King's voice cracked on command in a way that made some men grin and others suddenly want to kill. The old gods said nothing. The new gods took the candles people offered and accepted the silence that followed. The wind from the sea brought smells into the Red Keep that did not belong there, fish and brine and the memory of ships. In that wind, a raven came to the Rookery of Kings, landing carrying a strip of parchment written in a firm northern hand. It had been sent days earlier, before a September had learned what swords are for. The raven flapped and settled and made a tidy little croak to announce itself and its labor. The strip of parchment said very little, and all of it in words that no one could misunderstand. To Lord Stannis Baratheon, by command of the late king, Eddard Stark names you rightful heir and will hold the realm for you until your arrival. It had been sent again and again because sometimes words must be repeated to gather their own weight. Pycelle put this one aside under a paper that had a lion stamped into it and would be answered first. Then he forgot it for an hour and then a day, and then for the length of time it takes a man to grow used to a thing that has no immediate consequence. When he remembered, it had been pushed by other papers to the back of a tray where dust tried to be important and failed. Later, someone else found it. Later still, someone else read it. Later still, a man died because of it and another lived. There was time yet for all that, and for more. The night had lengthened, yes, but there are kinds of dark that teach men to see. And far north, on a wall older than any letter and more honest, a boy put his hand in a wolf's fur and took comfort in the simplest thing still available to him, the fact of a living creature that did not lie. He looked up at the sky. It held its cold with an elegant patience. He thought he could taste something in the air beyond snow, some change that did not belong to kings or councils or the heavy tread of armies. He closed his eyes and kept the taste as long as he could, and then he let it go because men must open their eyes if they mean to walk without falling, and he had a day's work to spend. When he went inside, the snow he had shaken from his hair lay like a crown on the floor and then melted, as such crowns do. Ghost sneezed delicately, and John smiled and did not know that he had. He took up a broom and began to push the snow into a corner, making clean a space that would be full again soon, but would, for a little while, be clear enough to measure with a boot heel. The day after the square, the Red Keep dressed itself in hush as if quiet were a cloth it could lay over blood. Sansa was led out by a pair of ladies who held her elbows like straps and murmured prayers she could not follow. The corridors were warm, their torches fussing and spitting. The air smelled of old smoke and rosewater. She walked as if on a tightrope, placing each foot where she imagined a rope might have been, imagining the tautness under her soul. They did not say they were taking her to see anything. Ladies never say such things. They say, "Fresh air will do you good," and a short turn before breakfast. When they reached the battlements, the air was fresher only by being more honest. It had the river in it and the stink of the city's drains and a shriller scent underneath made of grief sharpened by heat. The heads had been set in a clean row along the crenellations, as if placed out to dry on some laundress's day. The hair moved in strands. The lips were already no longer themselves. Septa Mordane's mouth had collapsed into an old woman's pout. Sansa felt the pull in her belly that presages retching and refused it. She found herself counting the iron spikes. She found herself noting the way the lime wash on the nearest Merlin had flaked, revealing gray stone beneath like old bone. She found herself searching because the body wants to find what it has lost if only to say it has found it. And then she found him and the world kept being the world anyway. There are moments when a person says something not with their mouth but with the way they remain standing. Sansa remained standing. A rook landed 2 crenels down, cocked its head, hopped twice, darted its beak, discovered that some things were not yet for it. A guardsman coughed behind his hand. Sansa's eyes watered and the wind took the tears at once. They felt sacrilegious, too clean on her cheeks. She did not make a sound. "Look," Joffrey said behind her, breathless with the need to have her do the thing he wanted. "It will teach you." She looked. She looked until the looking became a tunnel and the only way out of it was to close her eyes and step back. Joffrey's hand fastened on her shoulder and squeezed as if he wanted to find a handle there. "You will sing to me tonight," he said. "A gentle song. You will sing about a king. If you like," she heard herself say from somewhere far. The hound stood nearby, half in, half out of the shadow of a tower. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the boy, the way a kennel master watches a mastiff among children. Joffrey led her along the parapet. "That one is your Septa," he announced, pleased to show that he knew something. "That is your father." He laughed once, a small absurd noise, because the world had been as he expected and boys are often most gleeful when they are not surprised. "Kneel." She did not know whether he meant here or later or always. She found herself swaying. The stone was very near. She imagined, in the way the mind invents what it fears in order to see if it can be survived. The boy's back, arched, arms pinwheeling, the white of his throat. She saw herself, a figure small and motion-blurred, pushing. It was not that the picture tempted her. It was that it offered cleanliness. She took a step. The hound's gauntlet hand appeared and caught her by the arm, neither roughly nor gently, as if steadying a child who'd slipped on a wet step. "Come on, little bird," Sandor Clegane said, low enough that only she and the stone heard. Enough looking for one day. She went where his hand told her to go, and the world opened up into corridors again, where the lamps burned a polite light that had nothing to do with the sun. On the far side of the city walls, where stone gave way to the dirty genius of streets, a cart creaked as if complaining about every plank that had been asked to bear one more weight. Yoren walked with his head forward like a bull, El driving itself into wind. He did not look back. He could hear the feet behind him and had learned to count them without counting. The Black Brothers had a way of letting men's breaths write their own inventory. Beside the cart rattled 3 iron-banded cages with men inside who were learning a new exactness about how much a human body occupies. 2 were all mischief of teeth and smell. The third sat like a cat regarding its paws, narrow face calm, hair the color of wet iron falling into eyes that seemed to follow a private tide. That one? Arya whispered to herself, stealing glances when the march bunched and slowed. Is a different kind of wrong. Yoren said without looking. Wrong in more directions than a dog can piss. You keep away from that wrong. He asked for water, Arya said. He asked me nicely. Then you'll learn to pour water without letting fingers do any climbing, Yoren grunted. Doors have bars. Put the skin through the bars. If you can't do a kindness without getting your throat cut, it is not kindness, it's foolery. I didn't fetch you to teach you foolery. She walked a few steps in silence. The road lifted and fell, its ruts holding last night's rain like old men hold grudges. To her left a boy paced a little ahead of her, broad in the shoulder for his age, the butt of a hammer showing where he had bound it under his cloak with twine. He had a sturdy set to him and a way of not looking at people that told you he would rather be one of the things that people don't look at until it is too late. What's your name? Arya asked him bluntly. Doesn't matter, he said. It does to the person who has it, she retorted. He glanced at her then. Gendry. I'm Aery, she said. The lie had settled on her tongue without scratching now. Right, he said, and seemed to find the name satisfactory. Yours is a face that's always getting into things. And yours is a face a helmet would like, she snapped, and then wished she hadn't because it sounded too clever. His mouth quirked anyway, and that was something like a handshake among boys. They slept that night behind a copse of hawthorns because hawthorns have a way of making men behave. Their thorns will put a needle into a man's spine if he sits with his wrongs too close to the leaves. Hot Pie burned the porridge and declared it good. Lami pinched his nose and ate as if expecting it to change taste in his mouth if he humored it. The caged men took their portion carefully, eyes on Arya's hands as if they'd been starved of hands more than of food. The calm one, Jaqen, he had named himself with a courtesy too smooth for this road, spoke soft thanks in a way that made even Yoren frown and spit. Names are collars when a man like that wears them, the Black Brother muttered to Arya when they'd moved away. Don't let him slip the leash your way. The morning broke smelling of damp wool and iron. They moved before the city could notice they were gone. By midday the walls were a memory that the road stopped telling itself. Men grew taller outside walls. So did the sky. The talk turned from the price of flour in Flea Bottom to what banners had been seen and where. A peddler passed with his pack and a story about a Lionson standard near the Mummers Ford. Another, later, with a different pack and different teeth, said there was a wolf upon the Green Fork and that the river had learned a new trick. Yoren took in the talk the way a dog takes in wind. Ears turning, nose testing, mistrustful of any smell that came too sweet. In the north, wind carried no sweets, carried purpose. The great doors of the twins stood like old men with their mouths shut and their eyes calculating. Caitlin Tully rode across the bridge as if crossing a question with both answers wrong. The water below showed white teeth in the eddies. The stone showed older teeth, chipped but serviceable. Walder Fry received her with the enthusiasm of a man greeting an overdue rent. He was thinner than rumor and more nimble than he pretended. He arranged his many seedlings before him like a gardener taking inventory after a storm. You slowed yourself, he accused at once, as if he had sent for her and found her tardy. The road slowed me, she answered, and smiled the small winter smile of Riverrun women who have learned that smiles in the wrong rooms are swords. They haggled over honor like horse traders over a mare with a fine trot and a suspicious eye. Caitlin did not waste words asking him to be better than he was. She asked him to be precisely what he always had been and to charge for it. He named the price. She took it and trimmed it and returned him a bundle he could boast of having nicked more from than any man would admit. His eyes gleamed. Your boy will pass, Walder said at last. And he will pass over my bridges because he will be my grandson or my son-in-law. We will let the sept sort out the words. He will come to my hall when I call and he will smile at my ugly daughters. And the little one, Arya, is it? She will sit by one of my sons and learn to make a fry face. Are we done? We are done, Caitlin said, and did not let herself think of Arya's bare feet or Sansa's quiet, careful hands. She took the paper and she took the insult and she took the passage because in this world one often bought the thing one needed most from a man one could least afford to honor. She rode back into wind. Robb crossed before the ink had quite dried. Grey wind went ahead at a lope that taught the men who had never known the smell of wolf to hold their voices still. The Great John, who always believed himself already at the place he meant to be, bellowed something rude about phrase and the way bridge stones make men think their daughters are coins. The banners streamed and snapped, and old men standing in shadows of towers watched with eyes that remembered the last time a wolf had passed and the time before that and the time before. Robb's plan was a piece of north, inflexible in its bones and able to bend because it knew what it was. He sent Roose Bolton with a portion of the host to invite Lord Tywin to grind them down at the Green Fork. It is a particular kind of invitation, the one a careful man makes to a proud one. Tywin Lannister answered with banners and careful boots and the sort of order that hangs about him like a scent. He set Ser Adam Marbrand in motion where he would eat, and when he'd eaten enough, he called him back with a tug that was almost lazy. Roose let himself be pushed and counted as he yielded. He never sweated. He never seemed to spend anything of himself on anything. Meanwhile, Robb went quiet in the trees near Riverrun and took counsel of the small sounds. The clack of a stag beetle on bark, the chitter of a vole, the sound of men breathing through their noses because their mouths were full of preparation. The river whispered as it always had. Jaime Lannister had brought his horse too far into trees because the world had always made way for him and he had come to expect it. Robb sent the Great John to Wedge, and sent men he trusted to be invisible to make themselves into nooses, and set Theon and a handful of bowmen where they could make lightning when he signed for it. When the sign came, it was a white flash of teeth. Grey wind went in low as if under a fence, and men who had no acquaintance with wolves learned that day what meat learns from a mouth designed to end its concern with living. Jaime fought like a story at first and then like a man, which is to say worse. They took him with sweat in his hair and dirt on his cheek, and Theon laughed aloud, drunk with the thought of what such a prisoner weighed in men's minds. "I'll fetch you a cup for your thirst, Kingslayer," he jeered, and Jaime only looked at him with a blunt curiosity, as if to say, "You are what? To me?" When they brought the prize into camp, Robb looked at him as at a puzzle that will be solved not by cleverness but by patience. "You'll eat," he told the Golden Knight, tasting the strangeness of giving courtesy to a man who had broken oaths so loudly they echoed. "You'll be treated well and you'll sit a while. We have other matters first." Jaime smirked despite himself. "Such as? Teaching you what trees are for?" The Great John rumbled, and every man laughed with the kind of laughter that drains fear. At Riverrun, Caitlin arrived to find the castle encircled. The Lannister camps laid like stains around the walls, and the river wearing its winter weight even before winter was truly come. She did not let herself stop moving. She went to her father's bed and kissed his brow. She went to Edmure and scolded him for a thing he had done because sometimes scolding is the only way a woman can spend the heat inside her. She went to the walls and looked down and told herself the truth. They might hold for a time and then they might not. When the horns sounded from the north woods and the whisper of fighting grew to a rattling speech, she put her hands on the stone and set her jaw and waited. The rest of her life would be made of waiting and of moving forward when waiting had done what it could. That night, after Jaime was tied and the men had cut their meat with their knives and torn it with fingers that still shook a little from the fight, cries began to go up around the trident that were not orders. They were the noises men make when they find they have a leader they like the taste of. Someone imitated a wolf. Someone else called a name. The Great John pounded the table until his tankard leapt. "What do we follow if not our own blood?" he roared. "We have had kings who were far and kings who were near and kings who were boys and kings who were men, and none of them wore a wolf on their breast. Put the crown where the rivers will get no say in it. Put it in the snows. Put it on the head of a boy who did today what the songs tell. Call him king. No words have so much appetite as the words men want to be true." They ran around the hall. They leapt the tables, they clung to rafters, they fell into beards and stuck there, shining. Rob stood stunned for a heartbeat, as a man finding himself suddenly outside his own house might be. He looked for his mother and found her eyes steady. She had a long look to her, then the look of a woman seeing years at once. She did not nod. She did not shake her head. She held his gaze the way the river holds a boat and does not yet decide whether to turn it. The great John went to one knee with all the grace a great man can muster when his joints complain but his heart wishes to be first. Others followed. Rob did not reach to stop them. He stood taller because he had to or else bend, and he would not bend. "Very well," he said, and the sound in the hall changed to something that lives in men's chests long after they can no longer lift their swords. "But a crown in the north is not a ring of gold. It is snow on your neck and duty on your back. Say the words because you mean them." They said them because in that moment they did. In King's Landing, the boy king practiced the sound of command because sound is what a city knows of its rulers more than any other thing. Tyrion Lannister arrived before noon, dust in his hair and the mountain men at his heels like a pack of badly fed dogs delighted by being invited into a butcher's shop. Cersei received him with a smile that did what she wanted a knife to do. He bowed with a flourish that did what he wanted a jest to do. "You look well, sister," he said amiably, and walked past her as if the chair at the head of the table would move itself aside if it didn't want him in it. He sat. Varys's eyes twinkled as if someone had added a jewel to a crown he had designed. Peter's mouth made that almost smile that meant he was already betting on 5 versions of the outcome. "You have no right," Cersei began, and Tyrion held up the ribbon of parchment with their father's hand on it, and she closed her mouth because she refused to let him see her argue with paper. He looked around the table and made a small show of counting aloud. "Lord Varys," he said, enjoying the roundness of the name. "Lord Baelish, Grand Maester, Chem. A seat for the Kingslayer, vacant. A seat for our late hand, still warm, though not in the way a man prefers. And who is this? Oh yes, my nephew, the king. Your grace, I am come to save you from your friends, which are always more dangerous than your enemies until you learn their names." Joffrey flushed. He did not understand all of it. He understood enough to feel pricked. "I need no one to save me," he said high, and Tyrion bowed as if to agree and did not. Later, when the council had spilled and settled like dice, he found Sansa passing along the corridor with a maid and fell in beside her as one might fall in beside a person walking a dog to ask its name. "My lady," he said, "I am sorry for your loss, and sorrier for the manner of it." She inclined her head with the loveliness of a swan making peace with a river it does not trust. "You are kind to say so, my lord. I have not been accused of kindness often," Tyrion replied dryly, and he watched her face closely in case it changed and told him something she did not yet know she would tell. "If I can spare you any foolishness in this place, I will attempt it." She looked at him then, genuinely, with the frankness of a girl who would like to believe someone and is not yet done with the attempt. "Can you spare my father?" she asked, the child still within the woman's wrong room. "No," Tyrion said, "but I can spare you the need to be brave every hour. If the king tells you to sing, sing. If the queen tells you to sit, sit. If someone offers to be your friend, tell yourself a story in which they are not, and act accordingly until they prove you wrong. It is a tedious way to live, but it will keep your head where you like it." She almost smiled, a quick, painful thing. "I shall try to be tedious." "Good," he said. "We will be tedious together." That night he drank with Bronn and the heads of clans who accepted iron coin but preferred iron. Shagga wanted to put a head on a spike and played idly with the notion that it might be the right one. Timett of the Burned stared at the wine as if it were a creature he meant to train. Tyrion made bargains with them in the way of a man who had learned to speak to appetites without insulting them. He sent a note to Janos Slynt with compliments that hid steel. He was very busy being the hand of a father he both hated and understood. On Dragonstone, Stannis called his men to the keep's sept and had his wife stand near him with her eyes bright as a fanatic's candles. The mother, the father, the smith, the maiden, the crone, the warrior, the stranger, wood and gilt and paint that had absorbed generations of kneelings. were dragged out into the yard and up onto a pyre built of oars that would never touch the narrow sea again. Men watched with faces that did not wish to be watched. Melisandre stood in flame-colored silk that made the fire seem undecided about where it lived. She chanted in a tongue that wore old meanings as easily as a snake wears new skin. Stannis set his jaw and put fire to kindling, and the gods of his childhood burned while gulls wheeled and cried like souls. Davos did not kneel. He stood in the lee of a parapet and let wind flatten his hair and thought of a boy with his hand in his mine the night a black ship slipped through black water to a black harbor and saved a king who had forgotten him. He had a sack of onions under the bench then. He had righteous hunger now, and he was less easy in company with it. When men see fire, Melisandre said quietly at his shoulder, they recall what warms them and what can devour them. He has chosen. That is more than most kings do. Davos did not say that a king who chooses because a woman with a beautiful throat tells him to choose may be choosing his next mistake. He said, the Stormlands will not like the smell. They will like a strong arm, she returned. They will like a name that does not tremble when it is spoken. They will like what they are given. Her eyes shone. When she turned to look at him, it was like being looked at by the sea, beautiful and vast and unyielding. And you? What will you like? Onion Night. A day when children are not asked to pay for men's pride, Davos said. Then you will be unhappy where we are going, she said, not unkindly. But you will go, because you like truth more than you like comfort. Beyond the wall, truth wore white and moved on dead legs. The night the white came into Lord Mormont's chambers was a night like any other until it wasn't. The fire had burned low. The old bear snored like a moored ship creaking. Jon woke because Ghost stood with all his fur up and his lips making the silent shapes wolves make before a howl. The smell in the air was wrong, old and cold and somehow damp. Jon rose and the room broke from habit into a kind of clarity that is not courage but serves as one. The thing reached, and he reached, and then the room was fire and shouting and the stink of hair going to grease in an instant. Mormont cursed in a language older than the wall and newer than ice. Jon's hand blistered not immediately but later, which is often how bravery charges its price. After, Maester Aemon's chamber felt like a sanctuary and a judge's bench both. The old man's eyes, blind and yet seeing sometimes more than sight affords, rested on Jon's face with something like pity and something like an accountant's attention. You want to ride south, Aemon said mildly. Because you love your father and because it is a sharp tool that cuts away fear, deciding. Love does that. Says, I will do the thing that hurts me less to do. Duty does not always feel like that. Jon clenched his bandaged hand. They killed him because he bent. They killed him because he told a lie to save us. Perhaps they killed him because they are what they are, Aemon said. Perhaps they would have killed him if he had stood. Love taught him to give them something to eat before they took everything. It is not a small thing, love. Nor is it always the enemy of duty. Sometimes it is the only reason duty is bearable at all. I loved once. I loved my house. I loved my vows more. He leaned back, bones a cage containing an old, fierce bird. If you leave, you will be loved by those you ride to. If you stay, you will be loved by men who are not permitted to speak of it. Choose. That night Jon saddled a horse in the wind and rode with the others who had made the same wrong choice at the same hour and been caught by the same right hands. Their brothers' hands, pulling them down and back and into the hall where the fire laughed and the smell of stew put tears into their eyes. PYP held Jon with both arms. Gren shoved him. Sam stood wringing his hands and said nothing wise and therefore everything necessary. In the morning, the old bear handed Jon a sword he had once meant to give a boy of his own and did not. The pommel was a direwolf's head. The blade did not look new. It looked like something that had been waiting and was relieved to be given use again. Keep it, Mormont said roughly, or lose it. If you lose it doing something a man will say aloud without pity when they ask him how it happened. Jon took the sword and stroked the ridges in the steel with his bandaged thumb and whispered to it the way men whisper to animals they mean to live with. Ghost's eyes shone. The ravens croaked, snow, which is a joke to ravens and not to boys. On the road south of the capital, Yoren's ragged column came upon an inn where men drank forgetting and men drank remembering, and sometimes those groups were the same men at different tables. The Y ate a thin stew that the innkeep called hare because he had learned that a name changes taste in a man's mouth more than spice. The gold cloaks who came later had the look of men on a new errand and pleased with it. Their captain was smooth-faced and firm, one of those who had learned to hold his belly in when talking to ladies and his tongue when talking to lords. He carried a paper and the smell of a chamberlain's wax. "By the king's leave," he announced, "the bastard boy who was once a smith and may be called Gendry is to be taken into custody for service." "Service to what?" Yoren asked through his nose. "To the king," the captain said. "I've got the king's service," Yoren said. He lifted his staff. "It's wood, and not pretty, but it's true. This boy's on my business. Then I take him from your business into the king's business," the man returned, patient as a priest explaining a small theorem. Yoren spat, a single efficient motion. "The king has many hands and more mouths. Mine's for men who have none. You'll do no taking unless you wish to wear this staff across your teeth for a bit." The captain measured him and the black garb and the iron that hung about it. He measured the men at the other tables, who had stopped pretending not to listen. He measured the risk of making a street fight into a story. He folded the paper with an air of magnanimity and said, "We will meet again," which is what men say when they cannot afford to do what they wanted and wish to pretend it was choice. They went out. Yoren sat down and finished his hair because food is food. 2 days later, on a strip of road lined with willows whose roots held more stories than any man in the party, they met a different welcome. Fire arrows, the whir of slingstones, shouts. Amory Lorch rode with a look of a man who had not enjoyed his supper and wished to share his indigestion. Yoren swore and drove them into an abandoned holdfast with a cracked gate that had once been painted blue and now showed wood like blown bone. The cages were a problem. Iron is honest, and honesty can be a curse. Arya ran with Gendry at her shoulder and Hot Pie running as if bread had transformed in his belly into valor. Women screamed, but not many. Yoren did not collect many women. Men screamed because men do. The wagon with the cages toppled when a horse shouldered it in panic. The iron scraped stone with a sound like a beast. The bars bent enough to be pried. Hands darted. Arya found herself heaving because there was no one else near and because she had a sense, learned in some room of Sirios, that sometimes you free the devil you know because all the devils are hungry and this one at least has manners. "Girl," Jaqen Hagar said pleasantly, a foot already clear, blood trickling down his temple where the iron had kissed him. "A man thanks you." "I'm a boy," Arya said, mad with fear and effort, and shoved again. The others roared, all gums and hate, and the thing called Biter squirmed after. Yoren bellowed her name and a curse, and then the cough that happens when a crossbow bolt finds sternum. He sagged to one knee like a man kneeling to make a prayer with difficulty. "Get out, you stupid little," he told the world, and the world moved on without him because the world always does. Arya ran with the boy and the baker and the boys who had names she had not bothered to learn and the woman who had only a look and the 3 half-freed wolves in men's skins. Behind them the holdfast burned as if it had always been meant to end this way, fire licking the old blue paint and finding it sweet. In the trees beyond, men waited to catch what ran. They caught them with the tired efficiency of butchers at the end of the day. They left the small ones who could pass as small boys for later. They hit the bigger ones with the flats of blades when they had reason to save blood. Arya watched Hot Pie go to his knees and start to shout his name in panic as if to keep from losing it. She shouted at him instead. "Shut up, you stupid pie," she hissed. And he shut up because he had learned early to obey in kitchens when the head cook's ladle hissed. She dropped her eyes, made herself smaller, remembered dirt as a friend. They were marched. They were counted. They were uncounted. The world narrowed to the next drink of water and to whether the rope around a wrist had slipped enough to ease. They came to Harrenhal at last, that old, great lesson in what dragons do to men's ideas of permanence. The towers rose like bones with the flesh eaten off, black and glistening from rain that never seemed to dry. Smoke lay in the courtyards as if it had decided to dwell there and pay no rent. Arya's head lifted despite herself. She used to like great buildings. She promised herself she would not like this one. Inside, men with the lion badge on their breasts moved about too quickly to be a true garrison's life. They had the look of men who had been called to wear their violence more tightly than is healthy. They put the small ones to work. They put the bigger ones to fear. Arya learned new names. Whis with his stick, the tickler, who made men sing different songs. Chiswick, who laughed in a way that made even laughter feel thin. She bit her tongue and learned the way of slop buckets and the way of moving in a room men believed empty. She slept with a wooden bowl under her head because it was the one thing in this place that was hers and would stay where she put it. Roose Bolton came, finally, and made the air colder without lowering the temperature of anything. Arya carried meat to him and stood with her eyes down and listened to men report. She watched the Lord of the Dreadfort measure and measure, his eyes pale as if they had been washed in milk too long. He stroked his leech-smooth wrist once in a while, a reflex without meaning perhaps, and then she thought, all men tell you what they are doing with the parts of their bodies they forget you can see. Send word to your father, he told a fry with an unpleasant mouth. Tell Lord Tywin that I will guard Harrenhal and gather men to me. Tell him if he is inclined to a cruelty, he can spare me the time by letting Ser Gregor continue to exercise. The Riverlands make their own cruelty. They require little help. Arya watched him with hateful fascination. He ate as if food were about numbers too. Later, in the night's deeper hour, a man with hair like dark iron came out of the shadows and leaned next to her where she hid near the stables to steal a moment of air. A man owes 3, Jaqen Hagar murmured. A man must pay. Speak the names. She wanted to spit them like seeds. She wanted to hurl them like rocks and hear them hit. But something, some older thing than her anger, told her that names are more dangerous here than knives. She bit her lip until she tasted blood and named one, a small name to test whether the world listened. It did. By morning, the name had fallen from the balance of men. She felt at once sicker and lighter. She did not stop. News traveled like disease. Quickly where men are closest, slowly where the air is thin. It reached Winterfell with the inevitable gate of ravens. Bran became the lord of a castle that did not want to be lorded by a boy. He sat in the chair and felt the chair's weight climb his back. Luwin stood behind him and was river-calm and mother-kind and hopelessly learned. We will keep the harvest, he told Bran. We will keep the men. We will keep the peace we can. Your brother rides, we must walk. Osha, who had once been chained in the hall and now walked it with a freedom that made more men uncomfortable than any chain would have, watched Bran with narrowed eyes that were nonetheless kind when he spoke of wolves. The dead walk, she said in a matter-of-fact way, and other things. Your south has forgotten how the north breathes in winter. It will remember. At night Bran dreamed he was a bird and then a wolf and then both, and the castle's walls seemed to him like a ribcage, protecting something that had not yet learned how to be dangerous. Summer lay beside his bed sometimes, heavy and easy. When Maester Luwin found carvings in the old crypts he could not quite read, he dusted them with a cloth dampened only with water and admitted to himself, in the privacy of a mind that preferred facts, that there were kinds of truth that did not sentence themselves to Latin. Robb, meanwhile, traded victory for burden the way the young always must. With Jaime caught and the camps in disarray, he moved like a man who had been given the next chore before he had wiped his hands from the last. We will not batter ourselves to bone against Tywin's table, he told his captains. We will cut across to the men who bleed my mother's house. We will open the siege and we will hold the fords and we will show them that the map is not only theirs. The men liked it. They preferred action to calculus. They preferred following the boy who had given them the night story to lying still and trying to listen in the dark for men who snuffed candles. Catelyn came to him and placed a hand against his cheek. It was the first time he had stood still enough for her to set a palm upon him since he was a young boy, and the shock of it almost brought him to tears. He did not let it. You did right, she told him, and you did wrong. Everyone will tell you which was which after. That is their pleasure and your misery. We do what we can with the day we are given. He nodded because if he spoke, he might have been a child again. In the capital, Tyrion began to do small, effective cruelties as remedies, because the city was fevered. He replaced a captain with another who saluted with the right hand and took coin with the left, but did not put all of it into his mouth. He took Janos Slint to wine and called him brother and bought him a ship without telling him it was northbound, and if he did not do it today, he had the plan laid like clothes on a chest. He put a stopper in the worst of Joffrey's appetites by the simple expedient of keeping the boy busy learning lists and tailors and the names of half the lords whose banners might next be seen over the brow of a hill. He told Cersei truths in rooms where she could not hear them and lies where she could. He walked with Varys in gardens where the statues had their ears full of old rain and traded jokes with Peter like two men exchanging knives disguised as combs. "Your friend Stannis has burned his toys," he observed once, looking over a parapet to the sea. "He will come to play with ours." "Stannis has never liked toys," Varys said. "He will bring numbers, and the numbers will be goats." "I have always been partial to goats," Tyrion sighed. "They eat anything, and you know where you are with them." "You are with them on a cliff," Varys said, "and they are very agreeable about walking upon its very edge." "Then we must learn to walk more agreeably," Tyrion said, and thought of ships moving like thoughts along the black water and of fire thrown upon water that chooses what it burns with a new sort of appetite. Joffrey's name day approached with the certain ridiculousness of ceremony. Sansa found herself moving in rooms where men laughed just a fraction too loudly and then quieted as if sterned by a captain. She found herself in a garden at sunset with Ser Dantos Hollard, who had poured courage down his throat and found it disguised as disgrace. "Sing for me," Joffrey commanded, and she sang. Later he summoned a man to drown for him, and she spoke quick words that made the man into a fool rather than a corpse. It was not redemption. It was the small rescue swimming under larger helplessness that girls learn and sometimes master. The hound watched without comment. Later he told her, not unkindly and not kindly either, "A dog learns to take what food there is without losing a finger. You'll learn." "I will not be a dog," she said, more to herself than to him. "No," Sandor said. "You're a little bird. You peck. Enough pecks and a man looks down and wonders why his skin is leaking." In Harrenhal, Arya pecked in her own way. Whis limped. The tickler did not go up the step he liked to go up because his foot found no step there anymore. Jaqen smiled and bowed and was gone sometimes when he should not have been and present when no one had called him. Arya whispered names under her breath at night, not to give to Jaqen but to keep from giving herself to despair. She told herself stories in which she walked into a room where her father sat with a cup of wine and she put her head upon his knee and he made that sound in his chest that was something like a laugh and something like a wolf voicing contentment. She told herself other stories in which she put a blade in a throat and watched silence pour out. She did not decide which story she loved best because both tasted of the only coin the world gave her. When Lord Tywin came to Harrenhal, the air changed. Power alters rooms even when it passes through them. He moved into the hall with the certainty of a man who has never been surprised at a dinner table in his life. He brought order that smelled of vinegar and horse and ironed linen. He noticed Arya in a way that was both less and more dangerous than men had noticed her before. He saw that she was small and made herself smaller, and that she kept her eyes down, and that her clothing spoke of kitchens. He saw all that and then forgot her because she had made himself into forgetting, which is a skill that keeps children alive and makes monsters of men. He made war at a table with maps like a woman sets a hearth to keep a house. He sent Ser Gregor out with a gesture, and the Riverlands groaned. He spoke the names of Roose Bolton and Robb Stark and Edmure Tully as a man recites ingredients, not because he loves them but because he knows what they do in a pot. He took his meals in the same place, because the place had been emptied of ghosts by men who are good at emptiness. Arya poured wine and learned the smell of his leather and of his patience. She learned that silence is not emptiness. She learned that hatred is a hot coal one cannot hold forever without burning the hand. She learned that to wait is to sharpen. Stannis's letters multiplied. They found themselves tacked to doors and read aloud in septs and passed in brothels like a curious suite. Cersei burned a pile of them and felt better for the time it takes a letter to catch. Joffrey tore one in half and in half again and felt very brave until he was alone. Tyrion read them and smiled thinly and stacked them by author and audience and response required. Far north, the comet bled into the sky like a wound that would not close. Men everywhere looked up and told themselves a story about it. In the Dothraki Sea, a girl with a burned hand and new dragons read it as a promise. In the far isles, men told each other that old gods had opened an eye as big as the sea to look upon them and did not like what they saw. At Winterfell, Bran saw it and felt his skin prick as if a hand had been laid on his back in the night. At the wall, Jon looked and thought of fire made into a straight thing. At King's Landing, Cersei looked and thought of blood belonging to other women. Tyrion looked and thought of a match. Robb looked and thought of an omen that was not his. Stannis looked and did not look and said, "We sail when the wind permits." The wind took its time. Letters flew more easily than ships. In the Riverlands, the small people, the people who build the world and see it knocked down by men who never hold a hammer, began to move out of the way of armies the way ants move away from boots. Mothers wrapped babies and unwrapped bread. Old men hid coins and forgot where. Boys stole apples and discovered the taste of being struck for it. The tickler's work made the air around a certain wall colder. Arya heard his questions and wanted to pour sand into his mouth and could not. She promised herself another name. At Riverrun, Robb set men where they would hold and moved on like weather. He began to understand that victory feels less like triumph than like exhaustion that will be paid for tomorrow. He wrote letters to men older than his grandfather in a hand that had been taught to fish and hunt and respect and not to rule. They answered, sometimes, with the careful malice of men who enjoy teaching boys their limits. He took their malice and turned it into a road anyway. Catelyn left Riverrun to parley where she could, because parley is the work of women who cannot bear to watch boys kill boys without at least attempting to keep it to a number a god might find forgivable. Renly Baratheon's camp bloomed at Bitterbridge like spring invented by heralds. Olives and sweet wine and silk heated by sun and laughter that believed itself to be courage. Marjorie Tyrell walked there like a girl who knows she is beautiful in a way that makes other women understand their limits and makes men imagine they have none. Catelyn came into that tent of banners and perfumes and went dizzy with the waste of it. "You should bend," Renly told her, smiling, a peach in his hand. "To me. And then we will bend the rest of the world into a shape that pleases us." "You should have bent to your brother," Catelyn replied. "And then his stiffness would have been softened by your grace and his strength would have stiffened your grace. Between you we might have had a king." Renly laughed and offered her the peach. "I always admired the way your kind says what offends and makes it sound like a blessing." "I always admired," Catelyn said dryly, "the way yours makes blessings sound like indulgences." She left him with his banners and his boys and his lovely, foolish confidence and went back to where cold iron was being counted. Renly rode west later because west is where men go when they do not take north or south. He would not arrive where he intended. At the wall, the old bear called the ranging and men nodded because nodding is easier than imagining what it is you consent to. Jon heard the word Craster and tasted old smoke. He heard the word fist and tasted new ice. He sharpened Longclaw and did not cut himself. Sam earned a place he had not been born to and cried when he did because men who have learned to be frightened all their lives are surprised to find themselves brave, and that surprise often leaks out the eyes. Before they rode, a raven came with a letter that did not need to be read to be known. Men looked at Jon and then looked away and sharpened what they would sharpen. He read it. He did not show it to the others. It said little, only that a girl with hair like a lady's had sent a word from a city he would never learn to love, and that the boy who had been a lord had become a different thing that men treasured as if it could not break. He folded the letter and tucked it into his shirt. He walked with Ghost to the gate and looked back at the castle's ragged skyline, a handful of black teeth against a pale sky. Then he rode out with the rest, a small dot in a long line, and the day took him. In King's Landing, the first crates of wildfire were inventoried under Tyrion's careful scorn. Haleen the pyromancer simpered and explained and made promises in a voice like an old window. Tyrion tested a jar in a ditch and the green flare bit the daylight. And he smiled the way a man smiles when realizing that an enemy who believes himself safe in water has never learned that water, too, can burn. He sent Bronn to drill men who had been given spears for the first time yesterday and already wanted to lean on them like staffs. He told Sansa, when he saw her in a corridor with eyes that had looked too much and could not look enough, that there would be a day when the city burned and that she should stay away from windows then. She nodded with dignity and did not ask him why he told her the truth when so many others did not. He did not tell her that he had a sister and that sometimes he thought he might have spared her if someone had told her better truths when she was little. Cersei drank more. She arranged with the alchemists to have a different store of wildfire set near the sept, a promise to herself that if she could not keep what she loved, she could at least keep it from being paraded. She visited Sansa sometimes and spoke to her in a voice that made men who overheard it, rarely because Cersei is careful, believe there was tenderness in her. There was tenderness in her. There was more of other things. One evening, she walked to the place on the wall where the heads had been and found it empty of heads and full of birds. She stood there with her hands on the stone and thought of her own father's lessons and of the boy who had not learned any lesson yet. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, Varys was behind her, silent and smelling faintly of spices that were hard to find lately. "Do you know the story of the paper I have hidden?" He asked himself a question with the tone of a man beginning a bedtime tale. "I know many stories," Cersei said without turning. "The ones I tell myself are enough. This one is a small one," Varys went on softly. "It concerns a child who does not know he is the hinge of a different set of doors than the ones everyone is banging on." "Then he is lucky," Cersei said. "It might be his doom," Varys said. He folded his hands. "Luck and doom are twins. You know that." She turned then. "If you touch any daughter of mine with your tales, I will have them sew your mouth shut with golden thread and make you a statue out of your own fat." Varys smiled as if she had complimented his dress. "I love children," he said. It was not a reassurance. It was only a fact. "They do not lie well." "Nor do I," Cersei said. "I prefer to be believed when I threaten." She walked away and left him with the birds. At Harrenhal, Arya took the second name away from Jaqen and watched the world fold around that absence in that quiet, awful way the world has when it agrees with you too quickly. She saved the third like a coin tucked in a poor man's shoe. She noticed when men began to say the word Harrenhal, with loathing as well as fear. She noticed when Roose Bolton began to receive ravens that made his eyes glitter the way men's eyes glitter when they realize they have found the bottom of a bowl of cream and intend to lick it clean. She noticed when Gendry's hands learned new calluses and when Hot Pie began to make something like bread out of dust and water and stubbornness. She noticed when a girl called Weasel stopped crying and started biting, which is a kind of education. When Arya finally spent the third name, it was not upon the man she had planned to kill. It was upon all the men between her and the gate. The way Jaqen received that command, the way he went still, and then the way he smiled, a small smile that asked for a new knife and a different game, was a lesson Arya did not yet have the words to pin. The next day the door stood open, and the way out was suddenly a place, not a hope. She went through it with others in tow and did not look back because some buildings teach you that if you look back, they will fix you to themselves like lichen to rock. South and east, Stannis raised his sails and with them his standard. Men's faces changed along the coasts. They always do when ships fill a horizon and masts become a forest. Ser Davos stood on the prow of a ship that smelled of pitch and salt and men and looked at the city that had given him a knighthood and took his fingers and weighed those gifts and losses without rancor. "It will be a fair wind," he said. "Fair winds make for easy sins." Melisandre stood astern on the king's flagship, eyes half-lidded, murmuring old hunger to new flames. Stannis sat as a man sits when he has placed all the pieces upon the board and intends to play them without asking counsel of anyone except the part of himself that has never listened to another voice. Behind the fleet, the comet painted the sky, too red for comfort, too straight for meandering prayer. Tyrion set his chains across the mouth of the Blackwater with a satisfaction that did not show on his face. He set his men in their places and his jars in their places and his lies where they would do the best. He walked to the battlements with the hound beside him, whose silence had become comfort. He looked down the long black throat of the river and told himself that fear is a horse. If you do not find its reins, it will find yours. In Winterfell, Bran dreamed of roots tangled under earth and of a boy walking down old steps into a darkness that smelled like long-dead men and long-kept secrets. He woke with summer's breath on his cheek and the moon casting netted light upon his blanket through the carved shutters. He listened to the castle settle and creak like a ship in quiet water. He thought of his father's voice saying nothing, only humming a little as if remembering a song he had never learned all the words to. He put his hand out in the dark and touched Hodder's arm where it lay under his pallet, and Hodder said Hodder in his sleep and did not wake. In the pre-dawn, Luwin lit a small lamp and sat, counting beans in a wooden bowl because sometimes the doing of small useful tasks is the only defense against illimitable portents. In the river country, a boy with a bull's helm found that he liked the feel of a staff in his hands and the weight of metal at his belt. He found that he liked standing between a girl and a man with a stick. He found that he liked the way a girl said his name when she was not lying. In King's Landing, a girl learned how to make one kind of gaze into another and how to keep herself in the space between what a man wants and what a woman knows. On the wall, a boy learned that the North does not forgive, but it sometimes allows. On the narrow sea, a king learned that he could not make wind, only use it. What any of them were learning would be tested sooner than they guessed. The night was long. The night was only beginning. And under a stone in the castle where secrets breed without anyone ever needing to introduce them, a roll of parchment slept, ink dry and authority resting in it like a seed, waiting for a season it did not know and a hand it could not choose. If there were gods that loved such things, they were silent. If there were men who did, they were silent too. For now there was only motion. The endless, petty, noble, vicious, necessary moving of people, each wanting to keep what could be kept, to lose what could be spared, to love where they dared, and to pretend, as all people do, that the dark at the edge of their fire was the same dark as yesterday's. The weeks that followed learned how to take turns being loud and hollow. In the mornings, the Red Keep filled itself with arrangements, councils, messengers, a steady procession of men with information shaped like daggers and men with questions shaped like bowls that needed filling. In the afternoons, the city outside seethed with rumors and meat. At night, the castle quieted like a big animal in a stall that did not fit it well. Sansa learned to walk without tripping over the glances men unthinkingly left upon the floor. She learned where the stone cooled sooner when evening came and where the tapestries held heat longer. When the queen summoned her, she put on the face one puts on for a woman who might feed you and might set you to wash the blood from her gown. When the king summoned her, she put on the face that kept him from wanting to see her cry. When Tyrion Lannister found her once alone in a colonnade with pigeons pecking at the feet of a statue, she put on no face at all and lowered her eyes and felt, for an odd and dangerous heartbeat, safe. "Do you read?" Tyrion asked casually, scattering crumbs from his pocket so that the birds changed their minds about his legs. "Not just letters, I mean, things without pictures of lions in the margins." "Yes," Sansa said, surprised into truth. "Mother made us." "Good. Keep doing it," he said. "There are only two defensible positions in a city like this: power and being too small at the wrong moment to be crushed without someone's noticing. Reading is a third. It makes you heavy in ways men can't easily measure." She did not smile and she did not thank him. Gratitude is a scent, and Cersei's halls have hounds. When she went to the sept, she prayed properly, fingers together, thoughts obedient to the sequence she had been taught as a child. She prayed for her father until the prayer became a smooth stone she could keep under her tongue without tasting it and without choking. She prayed for Arya, and that prayer was the opposite, a sharp object she had to conceal in her cheek. She prayed for Robb, and each time she said his name in the silence she could see him in his boy's boots and then, more and more, in a man's. She prayed for Joffrey because she had been told to pray for her betrothed all her life, and she found each time that the prayer did not sit naturally in her. She said it again and again, sanding it down, trying to make it fit the mouth of a girl who wishes to do things the right way. There is a power in repetition that even gods frown at and then accept. There was one prayer she did not know how to make, and that was the one that contained within it both hatred and pity. For that one she sat a long time in the pew after the septa had left, and she counted the candles and thought of nothing and let the counting do what prayer could not. Far from the city's perfumes, Caitlin Tully rode with a cloak tight to her throat and a mind full of bits of speech that had come off Renly Baratheon like sparks in a forge. His banners snapped along the hedges like noisy birds. His knights glittered and then laughed and then glittered again. His camp shone with an order that had been learned in a tourney yard and might not survive in a field where men die wet. He was handsome and he knew it, and Marjorie Tyrell stood at his side like an answer. "You will bend the neck to me," Renly had said with the good cheer of men who expect to be obeyed for reasons other than duty. "You and your wolf boy will sweep the board clean between us." "You could bend to Stannis," Caitlin had said, and watched his mouth twist away from the thought like a man turning from a smell. "He will not be swept. Use him. Let the world learn for once what it is to be ruled by a hard truth and a soft hand." "Ha!" he'd grunted, amused and a little irritated, because she had kept her voice quiet, and it is difficult to be angered by quiet if you are not well practiced. Stannis would put the realm in a ledger and scowl when it did not add up. "I would put it in a song. Songs last longer. Bad ones do not," she had said, and taken her leave with as much grace as she could gather for a young man in love with his own pageant. She was in Renly's pavilion at dawn when the shadow came. She sat with a cup she did not drink, thinking of the words she might speak differently this morning, and a candle guttered in a way that made the air seem to fold. Brienne stood like a tree in armor, all clean lines and awkwardness, the only person in the tent whose honesty made it into the world whole. The cloth of the door rippled though there was no wind. The new light was wrong for a moment, as if the sun had changed its mind. Then Renly made a soft grunt, as ordinary as a man discovering he had forgotten a word and was about to remember it. His throat opened in a line no blade had drawn. He died looking surprised and a little offended, the way pretty men die when reminded that a face is not a shield. The tent contained panic and silence in equal proportions. Brienne shouted once and then did not make another sound until men came with swords, and she put herself in their way as if the act were a sacrament and her body an altar. Caitlin dragged her by the elbow and used a voice that had made children obey and once, long ago, had made petulant lords cough and adjust their collars. They fled because women who have lost boys learn to move quickly and without shame. On a low hill afterward, with the wind moving the grasses in a way that had nothing to do with kings, Brienne knelt and put her forehead to the dirt and said in a voice that seemed to arise through her, "My lady, I failed him." Caitlin crouched by her and set a hand on the back of the armor that had not yet even warmed to the day. "No," she said, "the world failed him and the gods he did not keep. You will not kill any of the men responsible because most of them are not men. You will come with me. You will keep your oath to me and to mine." Brienne lifted her head slowly, as if from deep water, and nodded. The nod did not save anyone, but it made a path through the day. Theon Greyjoy returned to Pike as men return to houses their fathers built, with pride like a rock and shame like a tide that finds cracks in stone. The causeway was slick. The towers clawed at a sky that had gotten into the habit of being gray here. He wore furs that smelled of the wolf and of the woman who had sewn the seams. The smell made his father's nostrils flare once. "You reek of the land," Balon Greyjoy said, "and of another man's pride." Theon threw himself at the old arrogance in the room like a boy into surf and found he could not ride it as easily as he had believed he would. His sister smiled with half a mouth and a whole appetite. "You came back to share the straw in your master's stable," Asha said. "How kind." He showed plans and was handed maps and had them taken away. He spoke of the north as one speaks of a friend who will make room at his table. Balon spoke of fire and of rust. Asha spoke of speed. The sea spoke of nothing and then of everything at once special like that. At night, the halls of Pike tasted of smoke and old salt and of men who spend their best words on storms. Theon lay with his hands behind his head and told himself that the ache of being misread would become one more thing to use as kindling. He wanted very much to be looked at the way men had begun to look at Robb Stark, with that grudging astonishment that says, "I did not know you had this in you." He wanted his father to see him and not his hostage years. He wanted his sister to keep her mouth shut for one heartbeat and be impressed. Wanting is a weapon with two edges. He cut himself on both. He went to sea in a light ship that had known harder hands. Dagmar Cleftjaw called him boy, and then lord with the same mouth. They came in at night where the coast went soft and then hardened into villages whose names the men on the ship laughed at. He bent his thoughts to strategy and turned them into knife-work because knives are easier for men to understand. He took Torrens Square with speed and a lie. He took Winterfell with a door open because Bran and Rickon had gone to look at the stables and ended up looking at a world where doorways lead to iron. The hall was familiar to Theon in a way that made hatred and love indistinguishable. He stood in it and proclaimed in a voice that wished to be deep, "I, Theon of House Greyjoy, have returned to claim what is owed." And Ser Roderick Castle looked at him with the kind of sorrow old men use when they cannot muster proper anger. "You were a boy with a kind smile," the old knight said. "That is what I remember." That night, Theon slept in a bed where the carvings under his palm were the same as when he had been 10 and had not been permitted to roam past supper time. He woke to reports and to the smell of fear, which is the same everywhere, and he told himself that what he had done was worth the telling. In the morning the fishwives spat when they thought no one was watching, and the stable boys kept their voices on a leash, and the ravens grew testy in the rookery. Bran Stark sat in a chair too large for anyone, and Hodder said "Hodder" in a way that made the word answer more questions than the one that had been asked. When Bran and Rickon vanished, the Iron Men asked questions with their boots and their fists. Theon asked questions with his eyes and his need. They found two small bodies at a mill. The smell of them in the hall was the smell of an undone thing. Luwin put his hand over his mouth and then put it down and went to kneel by the boys for a long time. Theon stood with his jaw set like a foolish bolt snugged too tight into a hinge. He told himself a story about anger and about what it does in men. He told himself another about mercy and what it does in kings. He told the castle a third thing in a loud voice, because loudness can sometimes make a lie true for long enough to become a truth. Smoke curled up from the pyres, and women wailed in the yard, and a dire wolf howled somewhere far and then fell silent. The truth went into the crypts with Osha in it, and Hodder behind, and Luwin in the dark offering things he did not have to give. The Reed children joined the secret like two leaves joining a stream. Bran listened to them as one listens to a new wind. The way north, when it was finally chosen, did not feel like a decision at all. Felt old, hard, and waiting. At Harrenhal, where stone keeps memory like marrow keeps its iron, Arya scrubbed and listened and waited. She let names gather in her like coins in a purse that does not jingle. She watched Lord Tywin Lannister write letters that would kill men and feed others, and she watched a lord from the Dreadfort sit and say, "As you command," in a voice as gentle as any song about winter. When Jaqen Hagar took his third name from her and turned it into an open door, she did not look at him long because her heart wanted to do something impulsive and stupid, and this was a place where stupidity cost more than coin. They fled in night with the building's old heat still in it. Gendry's breath sawed in his chest and kept time with his feet. Hot Pie whimpered and did not know that he was doing it. Arya did not whimper. She kept count of paces to the next stand of trees. She kept count of breaths. She led them by a way she had never walked because sometimes you can see a path in front of you if you have walked enough different ones behind. In a ruined sept with a narrow roof and walls that had learned to accept wind as another congregation, they huddled. Angui the archer found them at dawn, or rather let them know that he had known where they were for the last hour. Thuras of Myr came later, his red robes snagged by brambles into tatters, cheeks ruddy, eyes tired and kind and ferocious at once. "We are the Brotherhood without banners," he said with the twinkle of a man who knows that a good name serves as a shield and a canteen. "We fight for the small. We fight for the river. We fight because we are still alive and stubborn about it." Arya watched them and kept her hand on her knife and did not say she had a banner within her more fierce than any lion and older than any trout. On the wall, Jon rode with the half-hand into a country that does not consider men central to any story. The Frostfangs were knives left sticking out of old wounds. The wind there had voices. Rattleshirt led his men in rags and bones that made a music of their own. They took John as they meant to take him, alive long enough to be turned or dead alive enough to be thrown on a fire. He stumbled and got to his feet because no one in the snow forgives the first. Ygritte's eyes had the color of old leather made dear by long use. John let her go and then did not. The second time he saw her, the half-hand's pee. Lon had gotten into John's blood. Secrets sometimes ask for a terrible price to pay for your entry. You pay it or you remain what you were and freeze. Corin had told him, as men speak to boys they have decided to make men. I need you to be a story they will swallow like water. In the end, by the fog and the broken slope, with the wildlings ring loose and tight at the same time, the half-hand spoke the last teaching a brother can give another and gave Jon Snow a debt to carry the rest of his life. You must make them believe, Corin said. You must make yourself believe until you forget how useful lies are. He drew steel and gave Jon no choice but to draw his. The fight was ugly. It is mercy when fights are ugly. Songs lie. Corin slipped once on talus that had the color of old knives, and Jon's blade found the gap in his mail that a better fighter would not have left. The old pomegranate, as men called him, gasped like a man pulled out of cold water, then smiled a quick, unexpected flash. Now, he breathed. Now you are useful. Later, sitting by a fire that snapped with driftwood and old pine that had no business on that slope, Ygritte hunkered down by him and regarded him as one regards a stray dog one has decided to train. You know nothing, Jon Snow? She told him for the first time in a tone that felt like a hand placed briefly on his chest. He did not disagree because there are lessons one must accept before they can be used. Stannis Baratheon's sails huddled and unfurled like black gulls aching for a storm. Davos Seaworth stood on the prow of Black Betha and felt the hum of the hull in his feet, the way a man feels another man's mood through a handclasp. He had sons on other decks. He had done math with God, and after years of balancing ledgers and scarcely touching profit, he found himself suddenly rich with cause and famished for the salt he had once known would be his life until it ended in a noose. He said a little prayer to the mother when no one watched, because men like Davos have a softness they pretend they do not, and he kept his eyes forward because ships run toward trouble even when they are trying to run with it. King's Landing woke to drums one morning and did not immediately run to the walls because there have always been drums. Later, when the beacons on the coast made small orange mouths against the dawn, the city remembered to be afraid. Men dragged stones. Boys carried water. Women told each other stories that helped and stories that did not. Tyrion Lannister walked the mud gate as if it belonged to him, because for a day he had convinced it that it did, and told men what to do with humor that bit and did not poison. The Hound stood and looked south with the eyes of a creature who has chosen which fear to honor and was getting ready to meet it with teeth. Sansa waited in Maegor's holdfast, which had rooms that pretended none of this could alter their arrangement. The queen had gathered ladies and frightened girls and poured them wine and told them it was courage. Sansa led them in a hymn when the crying became too loud. Her voice did not tremble. Hers never did when other people needed it. Gentle mother, font of mercy, she sang, and the women's voices wove around hers. And for a moment the room felt like a place where men had never broken bread with their enemies and never made laws that had to be written twice to be believed. Joffrey came and left and came again, and each time he passed he took wine and left fear. Cersei sat like a queen in a play that has become real, and her mouth found a way to be beautiful even around words like kill and burn. At one point Sansa looked over and thought that the queen was making a friendship with the cup in her hand with more interest than the cup returned. When the clangor rose and the burning smell came as if from an oven where a careless baker has left his loaf too long, Sansa went to the window despite the Lannister guards' frowns and saw green. It is not often that the world shows you a new color. The wildfire lit the Blackwater as if a god had scrawled an obscene word across it, and the river, being old, had understood and blushed. Ships went up like tinder that had been soaked in envy. The sound was not like fire in a hearth or even like the burning of a barn. It was the sound of stars dropping too close to the ground. For a heartbeat, Sansa thought she saw the ships as small toys and men as flour sprinkled over sugar. And then the smell of it carried even into the tower and became only too human. She turned away. She was very sick very neatly into a basin, and then she wiped her mouth and sang again when one of the serving girls began to sob. On the walls, Tyrion enjoyed a heartbeat of pride that frightened him. It is a terrible thing to take happiness in the enemy's screams. The chain across the river came up on the winches with the groan of a very old thing being made to work for new masters. "Close," Tyrion ordered, and men sweated and strained and swore filial oaths to the machinery they had once mocked. The river caught itself. The men in Stannis' second line could not escape where the green had found the first. Fire crawled up oars and down hair. Davos saw his son's ship vanish into it as if swallowed by a green mouth, and his own boat shuddered and threw men like an aspen throws leaves in high wind. After, under the narrow sky, Davos washed ashore on a jag of black rock and laughed once in a sound that was not laughter. The sea does not love men particularly. It takes those it wants and sets others back on land dazed, as if by mistake. Davos coughed out black water and old prayers. He lay on his side like a man listening to the earth for horses and heard only his own heart. On the city's landward side, Stannis himself made for the walls with a determination that would have undone gates if it could be put into hinges. He scaled a ladder under a rain of stones and came within shouting distance of men. He had once offended with his honesty and never with his cowardice. He had no fear, and so he had nothing to moderate him. He made a breach with the sheer fact of his existence. Men went up behind him because that is what men do when a figure before them refuses to be denied. The hound went down when the world in front of him became all flame and screaming horses. He did not faint, he collapsed like a building properly. He found himself in a small hollow of stone with straw in it, and then, because some part of him had always been honest to itself, he knew he would not go back to that fire. He went to the keep instead, bleeding where he had been scraped, and staggered in to find Sansa leading women as if leading were a form of kneeling. He leaned against the door, panting. "Little bird," he said, "sing me a bloody song." She struck one match of defiance in herself and offered it to him like a candle. "You are drunk," she said, dry as the gods would. "Would that I were," he rasped. "Come with me." He said it almost tenderly, which is why it sounded like a threat. "I'll take you out of here. I'll take you away." He laughed at away because it means nothing in a city under siege. Sansa looked at him and considered. Her mind went to a square, a sword, and a boy on a dais with a wet mouth. She went to the sisters she had not seen and the mother who, if Sansa had learned anything, cut bonds when they no longer served and tied them tighter when they did. She shook her head very little, so that the refusal would not be heard beyond this room. "I can't," she said softly. "I am kept." "You're kept like a rabbit in a hutch," he snarled, and then he swayed. "Sing then, sing. I'll not hurt you. What do you take me for?" "A dog," she said, and regretted it at once because she had meant it kindly. He stared at her for a long breath and then barked a laugh that had pain in it. "I have been called worse." He stood, steadying himself with a hand upon the jamb. "Stay alive, little bird." He left her with a heart that surprised her by not breaking. She sang because singing is a kind of standing and because the women needed to see and hear something they believed in. When the thunder of hooves came from the Lion Gate, not theirs but Tyrell's, roses arriving with well-fed horses and the grins of men who enjoy rescue when it comes on schedule, she almost faltered, and then she turned the hymn into a different one without changing the words. Tyrion did not see the hand's offices afterward because blood covered his vision, and Ser Mandon Moore's blade was a line of logic that would have ended him if not for Podrick Payne's small, desperate courage. They carried the dwarfling half in his mail to a bed that did not know how to cradle him. He lay in a pleasant dark that was marred only by the suspicion that he had done something like good and would not be thanked for it. The city hired a voice and made it call, "Victory." Stannis withdrew to lick and count and plan whether to call it retreat or reconsideration. Tywin Lannister rode into the throne room smelling of horse and punctual righteousness, and Joffrey put on the face of a boy who has been too ill-advised to notice that he is ridiculous. Marjorie Tyrell knelt with grace and offered to be a queen. Sansa stood with grace and discovered she was no longer a betrothed, which made her for a moment a thing with no name at all. Littlefinger smiled slightly, like a man who buys a room while other men are busy burning the furniture, and afterward found her in a garden that smelled faintly of rot under the roses and said, as if in a fairy tale, "I can take you home." She listened. She imagined Winterfell with snow on the windowsill and meat steaming in the hall, and her mother's hands on her hair, and her brother's voices and her father's silence. She imagined the road to such a place and the men who would walk it with her and the ones who would not. Her heart tightened and then put blood out again where it should. "Thank you," she said. "I shall think about it."
Du, lite fingir murmured.
Thinking is cheaper than action and less dangerous. News moves differently in the north. It doesn't clap hands and run ahead. Comes like weather. River unlearned how King's Landing had been saved by wildfire and by roses and by a timely grandfather. Robb learned it with a face that did not flinch because his men were looking at him. "Good for them," he said evenly. "Now we know where the lions will prowl. We will hunt where they are not. Send word to Ser Edmure, hold your river, no more heroics. Send to Lord Manderley, close the Mander. Send to White Harbor, no grain moves south." He took Lady Talisa's hand under a tree that had been generous for 100 summers and winters, and did a thing boys do when they have forgotten that the world was arranged for other purposes than their joy. He married the wrong girl, which is to say he married the right woman for the wrong war. Catelyn watched and did not say the words that would have salted the wound before it bled. She, too, had once chosen for love and then had learned to be content with luck. She kissed him and did not speak of fry girls because these were words that could wait one day, not two. At Winterfell, Theon's fine story unraveled itself into string because lies under siege are impatient. The miller's boys were small and smelled of fear like all children when men are deciding things near them with heavy hands. Osha took Bran into the dark and then out of it again into wild dark, where wolves made the rules and the rules made a kind of sense. Luwin died with dignity and a little wonder, which is what good men deserve. Ramsay Snow came with fire, smiling his soft smile, and offered rescue as a man offers meat already cut with a knife put to the handle forward. Winterfell burned because his kind of rescue is a torch held to a thatch roof. Theon woke bound in his own hall and was led away through ashes by a creature that called itself Reek. Greywater Watch did not move because it never does when men not of the marshes come looking for it. Jojen Reed spoke to Bran like a boy speaking to a tree and likened him to the thing the tree guards. Mira drew pictures in dirt with a stick. Summer stood at the edges of their conversations like fur on a cliff edge watching the sea. Bran's dreams grew roots. He began to understand that when he dreamed of ravens flying, he could feel the pull of the wind under black feathers at the joint. He began to understand that the old stories are only ugly if you do not like truth. He began to tell fewer people that he had dreamed anything because sometimes the safest place for a thing is not in anyone else's head. In Harrenhal's forests, Arya learned the Brotherhood's ways. Thuras drank and then set himself afire in sermons and laughed when the flames loved him too much and went out. Angui taught the bow as carefully as if it had been a child entrusted to him. Gendry learned it like a hammer, stubborn, faithful. Harwin told her about the Winterfell stables and the way the straw smelled in the afternoon. He told her stories of her father that were different than the ones she knew and no less true. Sandor Clegane found them once on a road at dusk and made it less a road and more a tightrope until a man in a hood stepped into the last of the light and declared the hound attached to a different trial than the one everyone else was currently traveling. The hood came off, and there was the corpse of a lord with more stories left in him than breath. And Thuras put his hand upon that chest and said the kind of prayer that gods resent and then honor, because sometimes the audacity of men is what keeps the gods interested in the tales. Beric Dondarrion opened his eyes with a sound like someone biting into an apple. Arya stared and wondered how many times the rules of the world could be politely violated before the world's patience frayed. Beric set them to work. The Brotherhood was not a kind fairy tale. It was a practical heresy. They took purses or bread or the edge off fear. They returned knives and beatings and messages. They kept the river free where they could and marked places that should have belonged to no lord, only to men drawing water. Arya kept her list and allowed it neither to shrink nor to puff itself up, and in the night she sometimes rolled the names around on her tongue like marbles, cold, round, bright, a sound to keep rats away. On Dragonstone, Stannis counted and burned and did not sleep enough. Melisandre sat across from him, sometimes with a goblet of wine ignored, and spoke about Kingsmaid and Kingsblood, and the way day needs night to value itself. "You are Azor Ahai reborn," she told him, which is the sort of thing a woman can say to a man with conviction, and make him believe it in the hours before dawn. When the sun is up, men like Stannis are prone to exchanging conviction for order, which is why the priestess stayed near at night and let him busy himself by day with parchments and men who ask for coin and die for lack of candles. Davos, when he came back to his king through a sea that had not killed him, found himself in a tower that had grown a religion since he last climbed its stairs. He spoke more slowly. He used what words he had left carefully, as one uses candles at the end of a siege. "Your Grace," he said, and the title tasted more like responsibility than like right in his mouth. "We may yet win a war if we learn that vengeance is a battle that goes on past dawn and turns you ugly." Stannis looked at him with eyes red-rimmed from too many maps. "The realm needs a tailor," he said wearily. "It is in rags. And you have a woman who would sew it up with fire," Davos said flatly. "Fire does not do seams. It does ash." He went to Sells for the words because kings are men, and men prefer light that hurts their enemies more than it hurts their own eyes. In King's Landing, Varys lit a single candle and went to a place under the stone where the house slept. He placed a hand on the old block and felt once more the living chill of rock. He did not move the stone. He did not need to. He tended to secrets the way a man tends to bonsai, with patience that borders on worship. He had sent a little handful of coin downriver with a whisper. A quiet boy at the wall with a white wolf and a habit of listening. The whisper did not say what he was. It did not say whose he was. It simply passed the idea of a boy's safety from one pair of hands to another, a chain of small obligations that might hold in a storm if too many larger, more expensive promises broke. Later, he stood in a gallery watching the Tyrell men crown the city with roses and soft noises. Marjorie moved through the hall like a sail finds wind. Loras shone and then turned away from the shine with studied modesty. Cersei smiled too much and then not at all. Joffrey preened, and his mother's hand on his arm kept him from becoming ridiculous only because her grip hurt. Peter Baelish stood beside Varys and murmured through his smile, "There are so many ways to love a city. There are fewer ways to keep one." Varys returned and smiled as well. He thought of the parchment he had hidden and of the boy with the wolf and of a promise written there that had no words for what would be required to redeem it. He thought of a man in a sept lower than this one, earlier, kneeling on warm stone with the smell of dust in his nose and speaking a lie to keep children alive. He had seen many men die bravely and more die foolishly and a few die sensibly. He could tell the difference. The realm could not. The realm was a child that needed feeding and had chosen, again, a caregiver who slapped its hand and then kissed its brow and then slapped it again, repeating the pattern until both grew bored or one died. The bells tolled and the crows spoke to each other on rooftops in a language the crows swear their own and men claim the same. The river ran. The ships nodded. Somewhere in the alleys, a child was born to a woman who would not name the father and would never be asked to by anyone who meant her well. Outside the city, fields went on trying to make things grow. When summer ends, people always act surprised. They've felt the chill at the edges of mornings for weeks. They've noticed the sun coming in through a different slant of window. They have told the same old story about last year's first frost and whatever it killed and whatever it spared. Then one day the dew does not melt until noon, and everyone goes quiet about it, as if silence would keep winter from hearing its name spoken. The white raven had already flown. The nights had grown a fraction longer in a way that made candles dear and made men tell stories about dragons and forget that their own breath made dragons every time they laughed outside. The wall darkened sooner. The ranging went farther. Corran's death lay in Jon's bone like a splinter. The wildlings took him increasingly for one of theirs and then, in small ways, not. He learned to laugh when they laughed and to be silent when they went still at the night's edge. He learned the smell of the woman he lay beside and then turned away from, and he learned the smell of the camp's smoke when men boiled marrow out of bones. He learned that Mance Rayder had a voice like a man who had spent time remembering how to sing and had liked the remembering. "Who are you, Crow?" Mance asked him one night, his hand around a cup as if warming the cup would warm his own many doubts. "I'm a son who ran out of South," John said. "Honest enough," and Mance nodded because that was acceptable and new. "You will go up the wall with me," Mance said, "and your brothers will watch your boots from the other side." John thought of Old Stone and boys who snored and a bear who had put a sword into his hand with a grunt like a blessing. He thought of the boy's face at the end of every decision he had made since snow had first bitten his ears. The boy whose name was a low sound and who lay, in the South, inside a promise. On a night later, after the fires had faltered and the frost had stitched a neat hem along the bottom of the hides, John lay awake and whispered that name. He did not notice that Ghost listened and took no offense. Theon woke in a different life every morning. The walls were not always the same color. The smell changed. The food became worse and then stayed worse in the same way for days at a time. The man who called himself Reek was servile and then cruel and then servile again like a well-trained dog with rabies. Theon had thought pride a coin he could spend forever. Now he learned that humiliation is a currency that grows more valuable each time you are made to pay with it. He would have given anything for the chance to be a boy again in a hall where a man with a bald head would set a hand on his shoulder and say rough, kind things about what still needed doing in the stables. He remembered Robb Stark, and his mouth made a little shape that might once have been called a laugh. He remembered his sister laughing at him, and he wondered whether she had been the only honest man at Pike. In Riverrun, Catelyn and Robb spoke less and less because every word they could say to one another would be an accusation or a plea. She wanted him to choose differently. He had already chosen. He wanted her to forgive him in advance for the story they were walking into. She could not, and she loved him. She thought of Ned's quiet. She thought of the boy she had thrown an apple to in a Winterfell yard and the way he had caught it and been surprised at his own throwing it back hard. The apple does not get a vote in its own bruising. Lords came and went and made their genuflections to a king they had not been born expecting. Freys came and counted, and their mouths moved as their eyes moved, because families that marry by ledger even in breeding learn to make their faces into columns. The treaty lay under weighty plates and under careless goblets. Men signed it with hands that had not yet learned to shake from war. Catelyn watched the ink dry and knew that the world was simply setting itself up to have an excuse later. She had lived long enough to see excuses for sale in the same markets as roses. In King's Landing, Sansa moved through a city that had learned to hide its scorches with flowers. The Tyrells draped silk. The Lannisters draped lords. The gold cloaks grew fatter and then friendly with the Tyrell men who told jokes that rolled like coins and stuck in the ribs. Joffrey stood taller and had a new, thin down along his jawline that he touched when he thought no one watched. Cersei drank better wine and insisted it was less. Tyrion, face scarred like a map that has seen hard travel, took his meals in smaller rooms and made the jokes sharper. He liked his niece. He did not like that liking made him vulnerable to a family that measured vulnerability with calipers. One night, after the hour of the bat and before the hour of the eel, Sansa was led to a supper where men spoke of harvest and meant men, and women smiled at one another and did not mean it. Lord Baelish leaned near and said, "I have a ship named for your mother. It is a good ship. Men have taken wives aboard and then found they did not wish to leave it. Would you like to see its deck?" "I would like to see the river," Sansa said properly. "I always think rivers look kind." "They are kind to no one in particular," he replied, "which is a sort of fairness you may come to prefer." Ser Loras asked her to dance after and she did, and his hands were careful, and he said flatteries as a man says prayers when he knows the right words and no God is listening. When they turned, she saw Marjorie looking at them with a sister's fondness and a general's calculation, and she wondered what being wanted by an entire family would feel like if what they wanted was to borrow your face to adorn their victory. Later, in her bed, Sansa put a hand over her lips to hold in a breath that wished to become a sob, and then she removed her hand and breathed normally and scolded herself for letting the enemy dictate her body's foolishness. She counted the stones above her on the ceiling. She admired their indifference. Beyond the wall, Jon learned to smile at a woman and not show his teeth as a threat. He learned to keep his hand wrapped and to show his back as a gesture of trust when walking past a man with a spear. He learned to tell stories of the South that didn't reveal anything useful and yet were amusing, which is an accomplishment at any latitude. He learned to look at a king of the free folk without seeing him as a king at all, which is perhaps the only way to survive standing near someone like Mance Rayder. He learned to love a woman and hate himself in equal measure for the two ways he did it, honestly and while thinking of oaths. At night he dreamed. Sometimes he was a boy in a yard of stone. Sometimes he was a man in fur standing before a door in ice, and the door knew him and did not. Sometimes he was a wolf and then not and then both. In one dream, the tower of joy that he had never seen stood under a noon sun, and the banners hung with a gravity that did not belong to any wind. He woke with snow on his face and egret's hair under his chin and wanted to say a name that would make no sense in this camp. He kept the name where it belonged, beside his heart, where wounds go afterward to learn what to become. The city and the castles and the holds of men all learned to go on being themselves with more effort. Bread grew dearer and meat stranger. Maesters ran out of their favorite simples and frowned into jars that refused to yield more than a cent. Men who had once loved the smell of autumn began to find it accusatory. The moon grew thin and then fat and then thin again, and no one took comfort from its reliability. Somewhere under stone in King's Landing, a parchment went on being a parchment. The wax seal had pressed its bore so deeply that even if you scraped the wax away, the image would remain. A ghost seal. It carried a story about a child that the realm had by now forgotten by accident rather than design. The man who had hidden it thought of it less and less, not because it mattered less but because he had carefully found other ways to secure the vow it represented. He had bribed a gate. He had spared a boy. He had embarrassed a knight too proud to let the wrong rumor eat him alive. Those were the kinds of things that keep boys with white wolves breathing in the air men think belongs to them. In a small village in the Riverlands that had once been known for eels and now was known for the scorch on its smithy, Arya sat with Gendry and hot pie around a fire a tinker had left them in exchange for a saddle strap. The Brotherhood had gone to do its business like honest thieves. The night had a clarity that hurts, the way a sound can sometimes be too pure to be music. Hot pie fell asleep first, as he always did, with a small noise that sounded like bread settling. Gendry stared into the coals with his jaw set in a way that meant he had been thinking of the future and did not like it. "They'll make you a knight," Arya said softly, and put sarcasm into it so that it wouldn't grow heavy in the air. He snorted. "Knight of what? Soot. I'll make nails until a lord like the one with the hood decides I should have a sword, and then I'll make dents." "You make dents now," she said. "On purpose." He glanced over, grudgingly amused. "And you'll become a ghost that stabs people in their meat." "I will become a lady and have a little dog," Arya said deadpan, and he laughed a little and shook his head, and the world became manageable for the time it takes a boy to shake his head. In the small hours, when the fire had made a bed of itself and the stars lay in their cold rigor, Arya opened her hand in front of her and looked at it. The fingers were dirty and nimble. The lines in the palm made a map that no one had taught her to read. She made a fist. She laid it on her chest for a moment. "Father," she whispered, and then said nothing for a long time afterward, as if to let the world finish all its other tasks before it came back to this. Far south, in a city whose walls had been made for dragons to admire their shadows on, a girl with 3 small creatures accustomed to her shoulder learned that men's houses are as dangerous as their deserts. She learned the scent of perfumed treachery, and she learned the taste of meat when it is scarce. She learned how to make gratitude into a knife and back again. In the House of the Undying she learned that the world is a mirror that breaks into exactly as many pieces as you imagine it breaking into. She learned that power is the same everywhere. It is brittle when you push it enough and it cuts. At night she sang soft songs in a tongue no one else in Karth cared to hear, and the little dragons hissed obligingly. She taught herself to call them by their names, as if names could keep any creature from deciding it preferred the sky without her. This was not the realm that Cersei cared to count, nor the one that Stannis thought was his by arithmetic, nor the one that Robb believed he could rescue from itself with honor and wolf and will. But that other realm was out there, moving like weather, and before the end of the winter the winds off that strange east would make men lift their heads and sniff, and some would say, "Storm," and some would say, "Hope," and many would look at one another and wonder which word they were now meant to use. One night, long after the city had slept off its wildfire victory, Sansa woke to a sound of rain that wasn't. She sat up. The window's lattice gathered what little light there was and sorted it into squares on the floor. She felt a thread of air from under the door and listened to it. In the silence she could hear, in that peculiar way one hears things one is not meant to, boots going softly somewhere, one floor down, one hall over. She put her bare feet on stone. The cold gave her a message she could understand. You are alive. At the same hour, under the castle, Varys passed along a corridor, carrying in his hands nothing at all and within his sleeves 6 threads of speech, each running to a different corner of the city. He had tied each one in certain knots along its length so that if the wrong man plucked at it he would cut his own fingers. He wore perfume to soften the sharpness of stress, and also because he was vain, and also because he liked the way scent told him where he had been 10 minutes after he had left a room. In a rookery far away, a white raven slept with its head turned into its back feathers, dreaming, perhaps, of corn. The bird did not know it had been spent. It did not know the meaning of summers or winters, only of light and dark and food. It would travel again when told to and carry someone else's story in its feet. It was content. On the wall, Jon put his hand against ice that had not moved in his father's lifetime, nor in his father's father's. His bandages smelled of salve and of hands. He leaned his forehead forward until the cold spoke through his skull to his thoughts and quieted them. He thought of a boy taller than him somewhere south with a sword he had earned too quickly. He thought of a girl with hair like a thrown rope and a mouth ready to be cruel. He thought of another girl, small as an arrow and twice as straight. He thought of a man with a hammer whose laughter he had never heard except in a story, and of a woman he had never met and never would and whose name had the taste of iron. He thought of the old gods and of the new. He thought of the promise he had never been asked to make and had always been making anyway, to stand where he was told and keep watch. He turned away and went back to the fire. Ghost came and leaned against his leg, a piece of winter willing, for now to be held. He set his hand on the wolf's head. We'll go back, he said. We will. The wolf blinked once, which is as much assent as wolves ever give to men. The night outside was thick. The stars kept their stations. South, roses slept with their thorns under their petals. East, 3 little dragons noticed the moon and liked it. Under stone, a secret kept its ink quiet. In their beds, people with no names in any story rolled over and grabbed at the blankets because they had learned that warmth is precious and that no king will ever bring it to their door for free. And the wind, which obeys nothing except itself and the shape of the land, moved over the wall and then over 1,000 roofs and then over the empty places where men used to live and had fled, and then finally over the sea where even kings remember to keep their voices down.